Chapter 185. Countless magical runes on the ground lit up one by one. The sword energy carvings on the walls also followed predetermined trajectories. After the two elemental treasures were in place, the entire cave lit up. Hearing my shout, Cambion's first reaction wasn't to agree or sigh. His eyes, which were filled with lightning, stared right at me. The panic in his eyes was so obvious that I instantly understood what was going on. Relax, we're allies. How could I possibly seal you? Besides, in order to seal you, I'll need a god-level earth element ingredient. Where am I supposed to go find it? Camden turned his head in that direction. His meaning was obvious. Wasn't Omdarokin in front of him a god-level earth element ingredient? Sealing two elemental gods at the same time? You're making things too difficult for me. If we were at such a level, we wouldn't need your help. Do you think we're foolish enough to need your help to seal you? That's completely illogical. All right then. I tried everything I could to convince Camden that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so he finally nodded and agreed. While we continued to slack off, the pitiful Adam was already being beaten up by the furious Omdarokin. No, it should be said that Omdarokin finally wanted to leave. Meanwhile, our job class meat shield, Adam, stuck close to him and harassed him like a ghost. Since things had already reached this point, how could I possibly let him leave? Actually, when all the magical runes in this room lit up, it was already too late for him to leave. When Camden hesitated and prepared the final key, the thunderstorm transformed into a teardrop that dripped onto the ground. With a crisp drip, the entire world began to change. The powerful feeling of being in another world made everyone instinctively feel incredibly uncomfortable. When the three god-level materials resonated with each other, Immortal Orkin, who was unable to escape, would be at the center of the triangle. His elemental heart was resonating with the three materials, and together they constructed a small elemental world that was constantly circulating. According to the principles of the sealing spell mentioned in the ancient scroll, this seal only borrowed the basic characteristics of the elements to construct the world. For the elemental life, it was their nature to construct matter. It was just like breathing instinct. There was no way to avoid it, or even refuse it. This was also the reason why Cambion was so afraid. If we wanted to use this opportunity to seal him, it wouldn't be completely impossible. At the very least, it wouldn't be wrong to make more preparations. I had also prepared a plan to seal him at the same time. Of course, there was no need to turn hostile now. If it weren't for his help, it would be impossible for us to stall Omdarokin for so long. However, scaring the wind elemental god would also be beneficial to our future cooperation. At the very least, he would think about the consequences before he betrayed us for benefits again. Camden's losses? Who cared what he wanted to do? He deserved to be unlucky. It was his own fault for tailing me. Omdarokin, you finally have such a day. I've been waiting for this day. Let me watch you get sealed. But judging from his delighted laughter, I knew that I was obviously overthinking things. As long as Omdarokin could be defeated, Camden would obviously be willing to pay any price. But at this moment, Omdarokin suddenly began laughing maniacally. You want to seal me? Dream on. Even if I die, I won't let you have a good time. That familiar maniacal laughter immediately reminded me of certain existences, such as gnomes that were forced to their limits by the town security, gnomes that were willing to die for money, and gnomes that gambled with explosives. And so, the next second, I pulled Adam in front of me and hid behind Camden. You trying to screw me over again? All right then, should I say that he was already used to being screwed over? Even though he was complaining, he didn't move at all, perfectly fulfilling his job requirement as a meat shield. Asterisk boom. Asterisk before he could finish his sentence. The rumbling explosion caused the entire labyrinth to collapse. The sandstorm that was kicked up blinded everyone's eyes, and the wind and rubble that were kicked up by the explosion caused Adam to scream in pain. I knew that you didn't have any good intentions. You're a professional at screwing over your teammates. Cough. I ignored that guy who was used to complaining and focused on the windstorm god before me. Is Omdarokin dead? Based on what you meat men say, his physical body and soul have both been destroyed, so he's indeed dead. But for an elemental god, That's probably just returning to the Earth elemental plane. But this time, he self-destructed his physical body and killed himself. It'll be impossible for him to recover his power level without at least 100 or 200 years of rest. And when he makes a comeback, he'll be nothing. Camderon laughed maniacally as he transformed into human form, his expression filled with pride. Being able to kill his mortal enemy, any price he paid would be worth it. At the very least, he was now one step closer to the peak of the elemental plane. I nodded and didn't say anything else. I carefully put away the 4 god equipment materials that I had saved. 4? Yep, 4. Apart from the ocean bottle and the seal of fire, I also put away Camderon's tear of thunder and the earth-colored elemental heart that Omdorokin had left behind. Camderon was tempted as he looked at these small materials, but I waved them at him and pointed at the magic runes that were gradually dimming. My meaning was obvious. You're nothing. The spell formation is ready-made. Do you want to try it? Or do you intend to self-destruct just like Omdorokin? All right, I could only think of these words in my heart. But judging from Camderon's expression that was getting colder and colder, my threat had undoubtedly been delivered. A traitor would never be trusted. If he could betray once for a certain benefit, he would naturally betray a second time for a greater benefit. From the very start, I had made preparations for him. All right, Lord Camderon, can you bring us out of here? But sometimes, even if there was a grudge between us, it was better not to shed all pretense of cordiality on the surface. In that case, as allies, wouldn't the heads of major countries, who were rumored to use destructive weapons to aim at each other's capitals, smile whenever they met? Of course, I'm never stingy with my allies. Come on up, my friend. Thus, Camderon, who had transformed into a storm, easily brought us out of the labyrinth. However, near the entrance of the labyrinth, we met Marguerite, who had been waiting for a long time. When she saw us coming out, she heaved a sigh of relief. Your Highness, Lord Marguerite was the one who teleported us out. It was a pity that we were unable to locate your coordinates, so we were unable to send reinforcements. But since you successfully came out, as she said, then you should have already won, right? I nodded and took out the earth elemental heart. In an instant, the knight's cheers were deafening. Even though the crumbling of the earth elemental labyrinth foretold the fall of Omdorokin, when the boulder that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts was finally removed, everyone's taut heartstrings finally relaxed. Well done. Without you all closing the earth elemental door, it would have been impossible for us to win. When we return, I will reward you. However, my praise received a strange reaction. Everyone in front of me looked at each other, as if they wanted to say something, but no one replied, even after a long while. In the end, it was Marguerite who spoke up. How could it be that easy to close the earth elemental door? If we weren't careful, the entire labyrinth would have been blown up into the sky or transferred to another world. We only isolated it for a short period of time, but this seems to be enough. Hearing this, I paused in surprise for a moment before revealing a bitter smile. Omdorokin died such a pitiful death. If he had calmed down a bit, perhaps he would have seen through it. Forcefully summoning the elements was no longer difficult for him, and he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. Forget it, it's already over, so there's no need to think too much about it. In that case, should we go down again to close the earth elemental door? However, Marguerite smiled and shook her head. There's no need. The dimensional doors are maintained by Omdorokin's divine power. Since he's dead, it's only natural that the dimensional doors will collapse. I nodded. Just as I was about to introduce Camderon to everyone, the wind elemental god beat me to it. Human ally, let's have a proper discussion after everything is over. From a weak human insect to a tiny meat man, and then to a human ally, even the way he referred to himself was constantly changing. From a certain standpoint, no matter if Camderon was the wind elemental god or the wind elemental god, he was indeed frighteningly realistic. However, since everything was going smoothly for us right now, and we had the absolute advantage, I no longer had to worry about what tricks he would play. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, my ring vibrated, sending me the latest battle news. Roland, an incredibly powerful earthquake suddenly occurred. Red Maple City's walls have collapsed, and the entire line is in a state of emergency. Can you think of something? Hearing this urgent call for help and hearing the crying and shouting on the other side, I knew that the situation was dire. You want to seal me away? Dream on. Even if I die, I won't let you have a good time. For some reason, Ombarokin's crazed screams before his death still echoed in my ears. Obviously, this was his true revenge. Marguerite, you should have Red Maple City's coordinates, right? Can you teleport me there? It's enough to teleport only one person. Just as Omdarokin's physical body collapsed, a piece of rubble in a Mont Blood axe tint suddenly transformed, and an incorporeal giant covered in starlight walked out. As he walked, the starlight on his physical body continuously dissipated. Cambrin's judgment was correct. Omdarokin was already walking towards death. Right now, he was nothing more than the last remnant of his soul. From the very start, the Earth Elementals had been a Mont Blood Axe tribe's allies. That was why Omdarokin had cut off a portion of his own arm in order to deal with the upcoming battle. That portion of his physical body turned into rubble, and he gave it to the Earth Elementals as his final trump card. At the very end, you can summon my power. Remember, only at the very end. Otherwise, I'll take out my anger on you first. At this moment, as Immortal Orkin watched his divine power continuously dissipate, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Damned humans! Even if I'm destined to die, I'll drag all of you down with me. Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk after a series of explosions, the nearby beastmen suffered heavy losses. Because of this, Omdarokin, who had once again self-destructed his physical body, was willing to risk everything in order to take his final revenge. Foolish humans, I, Omdarokin, shall make you tremble as you walk towards destruction. Right? Earth, I am your master. Show me your final loyalty, and let those damned city walls turn into rubble and bricks under my wrath. And so, when Omdarokin lost his entire physical body and returned to the Earth elemental plane covered in injuries, his hibernation period had been extended to the point where he could directly wait for the next holy war. The powerful earthquake he brought about was destined to bring the most terrifying destruction. And this was only the beginning. Countless Earth elementals emerged from the ground. Their goal was to destroy the enemies of the Earth Elemental Master. Red Maple City's defensive line, emergency. Chapter 186. Fortress walls and castles were once the symbol of the Middle Ages in a certain world. However, due to the rise of modern weapons, they gradually declined and became the tears of the times. The bombardment of the organized air force, the long-range attack of the artillery, the large-scale destruction of strategic weapons, and the forceful breaking of the steel torrent could all render these immovable barriers meaningless. Therefore, in the relatively peaceful modern era, these magnificent wonders that had played a huge role in countless wars in history and played a significant strategic role had also changed from a military location to a tourist attraction open to the world. Times change. As technology improves and new species appear, the original iron laws of war will become useless. No matter how sturdy a fortress is, it will still become a tourist attraction in the end. That was what I had always been thinking. Perhaps due to the differences between the magical and technological civilizations, there wouldn't be identical tanks and bombers in this generation. However, a large number of high-level aerial knights would still be able to ignore city walls and throw destructive weapons. As the engineers' technology improved, it wouldn't be impossible for a magical civilization to create a steel army. As for strategic weapons of destruction, hadn't forbidden spells always existed? Although there were very few forbidden spell mages, and even fewer dared to use forbidden spells, it wasn't impossible for powerful and common magic spells to appear as magical civilization continued to develop. At the very least, I had come up with several insanely powerful weapons that could be used on the battlefield based on the creations of my previous world. For example, Undead Calamity Virus, Heavy Radiation Liquid Slimes, Fortress Continental Destroyer, Mutated Poison Gas Cough, as a pacifist, it would be best to seal those obviously anti-human and shameless things until the end of the world. Returning to the main topic, I came to a conclusion that was inconceivably different from the mainstream view based on my judgment. Future wars will also enter a new era without city walls. That was why, unlike the Sluir Kingdom, which focused all of its resources on building fortress defenses, no matter if it was in the past or in Donglan, I unhesitatingly gave up on the time-consuming and laborious construction of city walls. Instead, I focused all of my resources on new technologies, new troop types, and actual combat. Defensive warfare, with solid city walls as the foundation, is highly likely to be swept into the trash heap of history in this holy war. However, that time of change was definitely not now. Fortresses and castles seemed to be purely passive fortifications, but they were extremely important in the era of cold weapons. Whether it was against the surprise attacks of the nomadic cavalry or against the beasts that came hunting at night, they could play an irreplaceable role in the core of the strategy. Defending and attacking the city had become the standard procedure of countless wars. It was no longer just a defensive barrier in reality, but also a psychological fortress. The residents living in the city would feel safe and secure from the bottom of their hearts when they saw the towering city walls. Even though there was a new era of innovative sources of fire, it wasn't truly popularized. Furthermore, it wasn't that easy for humans to change their mindset. In the eyes of most people, the equation of losing a city was still there. At this time, Red Maple's line of defense was equivalent to the psychological support of the humans. If anything happened to him, it's all over. We have no hope. We're all going to die. The one who screamed out words of despair wasn't a useless coward. This general had just killed more than 10 beastmen in melee combat, and he didn't even have time to bandage his wounds. However, when he screamed, he sounded just like a useless deserter who was forced to serve as cannon fodder on the battlefield. Not all of the city walls had been destroyed in that earthquake. However, there were countless openings that allowed the beasts to freely enter the sheep pens to hunt. The city walls had already lost their purpose. The city walls are gone was equivalent to the war has already been lost. This was the iron rule in his heart, and the collapse of his psychological defenses caused this warrior to fall into despair. There were many warriors like him. Even the most resolute of warriors would first think that this war had already been lost. Fighting against the beastmen who had the advantage in numbers, their individual strength and morale would be completely suppressed. This was suicidal from the very start. Never underestimate the experience and wisdom of the long-lived species. Amdarokin, who seemed like he wasn't good at thinking, originally had a cunning appearance. Even though he was involved in the game of chess, he had always been observing the overall situation. He didn't directly interfere, but he had always been trying his best to understand the situation of the war. Thus, when he was destined to fail, he ruthlessly stabbed a knife into the human's biggest weakness at this critical juncture. He always knew that once Red Maple City fell, it would be the human's most painful wound. If Red Maple City fell, there would be no more obstacles in the vast plains after it. This would inevitably cause the entire battlefield to lose balance, and the entire human allied army would fall into an avalanche of consecutive defeats. At that time, the beastmen could even turn around and encircle Antun again, and he would naturally be able to take his revenge. Hurry up and run. The beastmen have entered the city. I can't accept this. We've already fought to this point. But fortunately, not everyone had already given up hope. Or it could be said that a certain princess's foolishness was quite a headache, but her personality of never giving up until the very last moment was still quite likable. The fluttering battle flag hadn't fallen, and the people of the Mist had already faced countless desperate situations. Even a massacre of the entire city didn't scare them. So what could they do if only the city walls were broken? Abandon the outer city walls and retreat to the inner city. The wounded go first, and those who can stand block those beasts for me. Angry roars that still carried a hint of childishness echoed in the sky above the city. The warriors began to realize their mistake, and finally, the confused warriors began to move. We've already experienced countless bloody battles. Now is not the time to give up. The crumbling outer city walls were immediately abandoned. Most of the residents were already in the inner city, and the ones that needed to be evacuated were mainly the wounded. As for the defending soldiers who had been crushed under the collapsed city walls, they didn't have the time to clean up the rubble. The more critical the moment, the more important the trump card was. Finally, the Donlon people threw out their final trump card. Great Judgment. The God Equipment Primal Codex was activated, and a silver holy light instantly enveloped the entire city. All beastmen who were guilty of invading would be subjected to multiple negative statuses, such as having their freedom restricted, incorporeal shackles on their feet, weapons locked, and so on. But unfortunately, before Wumians became the guardian god of the Northlands, the Church of Law originally had no reason to interfere in this battle. Only Renee and a few other members of the Law Job class were present in Red Maple City, and the powerful buffs that increased their power levels didn't have much of an effect. But just the effect of restraining the Beastmen was enough. In this crucial moment, every minute that the Beastmen were delayed would allow more warriors to retreat to the inner city, and more warriors would be able to reorganize their defensive positions. Notify the Borealis to fire at full power. We need reinforcements. Overload the Train King and give these damned Beastmen a present. In times of danger, the role of a pillar of support became even more apparent. She didn't need to have much wisdom or experience. As long as she was able to calm herself down and come up with countermeasures, it would be enough to calm everyone down. The chaos at the Western Gate began to be pacified. Under everyone's regretful gazes, the overloaded Train King was thrown off the city wall. Asterisk boom. Asterisk another mushroom cloud slowly rose up on the battlefield. The violent explosion even blew the city gate away, but the beastmen who intended to pass through were instantly turned into dust. The huge ditch created by the explosion could be used as a moat. At this moment, everyone was being taken away from the crumbling city wall by the floating airship. They were preparing to rebuild the defenses in the inner city. Finally, the crumbling city wall completely collapsed, and the fallen wall even crushed quite a few beastmen. On the floating airship, Renee was silently cursing as she looked at the ruins. Damn beastmen, I want your souls to forever struggle in pain in the river Styx. What did I say? What is the river Styx? If she could look in a mirror, Renee would probably be even more astonished. The current Renee had blood-red eyes, and the black, wing-shaped mist behind her was beginning to materialize. And behind her, an illusory black figure was laughing maniacally. Ah, the seed has finally sprouted. Night had fallen, but the mage Gildan Antoon was still bustling with activity. In the plaza in front of the mage tower, several hundred mages were busy. Countless magical runes were inscribed on the ground, and large amounts of precious resources were being consumed. The paint used was dragon's blood, which couldn't be bought with money. Precious magical goblets of fire were being used for illumination, and archmages were lying on the ground as they studied the rarely seen magical runes. You're still not done? Do you think that ultra-long distance accurate teleportation is easy? Let me tell you, this is no different from accurately opening a door to another dimension. If there's even the slightest difference, you'll be thrown into another dimension. Sit properly and stop shaking. I'm going to calculate your weight. The mages passing by kept covering their mouths as they snickered. It was no wonder that they were acting like this. My current appearance was bound to become a new humiliation. The cold wind kept blowing, but my entire body was trembling. I was only wearing a pair of underwear. Let me be clear, I wasn't infected by Shiwedi. Stop shaking. How am I supposed to measure your weight like this? Oh my, your weight is still over the limit. You're beyond my abilities. You still need to lose weight. Currently, my entire body was covered in strange runes drawn in dragon's blood. I was trembling on top of a large scale that was used to store magical materials. How was I supposed to lose weight? I hesitantly reached my hand downwards, but seeing that more and more people were gathering around me, as well as the ladies who were covering their eyes and peeking down at me, I couldn't bring myself to do so. You're still over the limit. Just a pair of underwear isn't enough. How about you shave off all your hair and eyebrows? Marguerite adjusted her eyeglasses as she coldly made the fatal decision. Shave off all my hair? For some reason, I thought a bald egg. That bald, round head would be cool in the summer, and it could even reflect sunlight to keep warm in the winter. How nice. At night, I could even save on oil, and my blinding holy light secret technique would be twice as effective. Adam, stop giving me random psychological advice. If you want to reflect light, go do it yourself. Adam, who was beside me, was rolling on the ground in laughter. He was the only one who would say such unreliable things. Or, I should say that he was the only one who would be so bored. However, due to my various excuses, Marguerite's expression became colder and colder. She seemed to be rather displeased. Is there any other way? Hand. I instantly felt my heart sink. Chopping off my arm to reduce the weight was indeed the only solution I had. After hesitating for a moment, I took out the Roland's sacred sword and held it against my arm for quite a while. Finally, I tossed it to Adam. Adam, you do it. I'm afraid of pain. I closed my eyes and waited for quite a while. However, I only heard a hissing sound. When I opened my eyes, I saw that Roland and Harloise were exchanging strange expressions. Stop wasting time. We don't have much time. Be quick with your sword. I'll find a priest to reattach it. What are you laughing at? Asterisk hearing this. Adam immediately laughed to the point where he couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, Marguerite adjusted her eyeglasses again. Why do you want to chop off your arm? There's no need. Do you intend to install a hook and become a pirate captain? That way? So you were joking. You can already teleport? No, I never joke in the domain of magic. Marguerite still had a serious expression as she spoke. The cold glint in her eyes made one's heart tremble. She was indeed being serious. Your current weight is indeed insufficient. However, when I said hand, I wanted you to take off the age ring on your finger. In an instant, I understood. The current me was overweight. It was impossible for me to be overweight when I was younger. Taking off the ring would be enough. Why didn't you say so earlier? You tricked me again. Hey, wait a moment. I still have something to say. Furious, I hurriedly took off the ring. However, before I could even complain, Marguerite's cane descended and the light of teleportation enveloped me. At this moment, I could only hurriedly pick up the Roland's sacred sword and prepare myself. I could only helplessly accept the reality that I had been tricked. After I left, the square returned to silence. Adam suddenly spoke. Did you vent your anger? Of course. That bastard, he actually forgot about me again. He really isn't a good friend. The way he looks at a stranger is so irritating. Even the saint who always had a calm expression had times when she was filled with righteous indignation. However, right after that, Marguerite's expression suddenly turned gloomy and she laughed out loud. However, I can't completely blame him. Let bygones be bygones. Even if he forgets about the past, I can just add new memories. This time, I should leave a deep impression on him. Adam shook his head helplessly and turned his attention to the south. That was where the final battle would determine the fate of the entire Northlands would take place. I don't know if Roland will be able to do it by himself. That side really isn't easy to deal with. He's not alone. Did you forget about Amelia and that cat? Why do you think they disappeared for so long? That brat Roland is inconceivably cautious. He already left behind several trump cards that no one knows about. Just as I expected, at this moment, in the market area of Red Maple City, a witch was making her final preparations for the battle. Oh my, I really suffer a huge loss this time. When the time comes, I'll ask Junior for compensation. Little babies, wake up, it's time to eat. Relax. The main food this time isn't the disgusting zombies. This time, let's play Plants vs. Beastmen. Chapter 187. It was already night. Snow covered the entire area, making the frozen ground even more unbearable. Snow blanketed the land. Even without the cover of the night, one could only see a few meters in front of them when they opened their eyes. No matter how strong a warrior was, he couldn't do anything when he couldn't see. And this wasn't even the deadliest factor on the battlefield. It's so cold. How many of us can survive this night? Even Chief Lord, who was as tough as an ice mountain in the eyes of his tribesmen, wasn't an emotionless man of steel. It was already cold enough in the north, and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees at night. Even the air they breathed felt like it would freeze in an instant. Even though the beastmen who could enter the battlefield were generally strong, they weren't men of steel. They still had to take care of the cold in the middle of a fierce battle. Their vision was pitch black, and they had to look for directions from horns and battle flags. They had to fight the most difficult street battles in the chaos. They might even mistake the knife-wielding assassins as their allies, but the heads they chopped off were their friends and family. According to the unwritten rules of the war in the north, both sides should have called a truce to avoid the tragic ending of winning the war with no one to celebrate. But now time was life. Every second of hesitation meant countless lives were lost. Neither side called a truce. At this time, everyone wanted to throw in their last bit of strength. Only by completely crushing the opponent could they survive. Lord could imagine a beastman warrior finally defeating his opponent, but the blood at the window had already turned into a thin layer of blood. The loss of blood took away most of his stamina, and he moved slower and slower until he froze to death beside his opponent's corpse. Looking at the pitch-black alley in front of him, it was like a vicious beast from the abyss waiting for its prey with a wide, open mouth. Lord shuddered inexplicably. He had a bad feeling that he might not live to see the sun rise the next day. This wasn't a groundless fear. Lord's keen sixth sense had accompanied him through countless life and death situations. But this time, he didn't want to listen to his instincts. Don't let the other tribes look down on us, Claw Tribe. We can't fall behind. Take this city and completely destroy the north. The glory of the humans will belong to us. The god of war is protecting us. His Valkyrie palace will leave a place for our warriors. If we are destined to die here, then let us meet again at the feast of the Valkyrie palace. Even though he said something impossible, his warriors still responded to his summons. Silently taking a sip of the strong wine that could dispel the cold air, they stepped into the pitch-black battlefield with resolute gazes, stepping into the giant mouth of the abyss where they would never be able to return. There was no hesitation, no fear. In this war without justice, there was no holiness, no evil. Everyone was fighting for their own race, for more living space, for their race and their families to survive in this cruel holy war. The city walls had lost their meaning. Every moment, every place, there were warriors who were bleeding and fighting. Human lives had become worthless at this moment. They were all mortals with physical bodies. Even if they were gold-ranked war commanders, they could be killed by a shovel that suddenly popped out of a small bungalow. We've lost contact with the Cash Tribe. 20 minutes ago, we also lost contact with Lord Kagma. The Aerial Knights are requesting for battle. This is their blood letter. Lord Lund is requesting for reinforcements. We've lost contact with 2 of his teams. He's met with obstacles. Many of his warriors are missing. We need more warriors to complete the encirclement. The Wolf King's advance is smooth. He's reached the predetermined area. However, he's lost more than 40% of his warriors. He still refuses to retreat. Hearing the bad news, Almont's eyes twitched. The tenacity of the humans had far exceeded his expectations. That damned snow had turned the battlefield into the cruelest meat grinder. Tell those aerial knights not to cause trouble at this time. They don't even know how they'll fall when they're in the air. Even if they die, they have to die with value. Reinforcements? Let the newly formed tribe take the place. The messenger hesitated for a moment. The words of doubt were already at the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them in the end. The newly formed tribe? It was formed from the remaining tribes that had lost most of their people in the war. A group of wounded and defeated soldiers. They had lost their chief, their tribe name, and their totem. Thus they came together. Perhaps they weren't strong enough, but they were the seeds of the future. When the seeds had to be put into the pot to satisfy their hunger, it also showed the plight of the beastmen. However, military orders were like mountains. At this time, there was no room for hesitation. Everyone knew that the path of bravery would be the victor when enemies met on a narrow path. Whoever could grit their teeth and persevere to the end would be the new master of this land. Now, it was time to compete in perseverance and sacrifice. The beastmen had suffered such great losses. For the humans, this battle was even more difficult to fight. The chaotic battle without rules was a comprehensive test of individual strength. The human defenders who had lost the advantage of fortifications suffered a sharp increase. 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and even 1 to 10 local casualties. We've long since had nowhere to retreat. Behind us are the defenseless civilians. Losing Red Maple City is no different from losing the entire Northern Lands. We'll become the sinners of the entire human society. Our ancestors have been humiliated because of this. The humans had no reason to retreat. This was a battle to protect their homeland. There was no room for retreat. The snow would eventually stop, and the sky would eventually brighten. When that time came, no one knew how many people would survive. The ones with more survivors would naturally be the victors. However, this night wouldn't be so easy to pass. The nightmares and the shadows were stirring. In a small alley, a beastman soldier only left a cry of surprise before vanishing without a trace. On the other side, the same fate befell his companions. Amidst their cries of surprise, they were suddenly dragged into hell by a dark hand that reached out from underground. Shamans, destroy this city. As his subordinates disappeared one by one, Lord finally couldn't sit still. Under his command, the elemental shamans no longer cherished their dwindling mana. After communicating with the elements, a sky-covering thunderstorm and a massive earthquake were summoned, razing the entire city to the ground. The mastermind behind the disappearance of the Beastman soldiers was naturally exposed. Flowers? In front of him was a flower that the Northern Lands viewed as a rare luxury. Lord had taken the opportunity to study in the south. The familiar branches and colorful petals were exactly the same as he remembered, but this is too huge. Indeed, in front of him was a garden. However, the flowers in the garden were a little strange. Offensive spells that could destroy houses were useless against them. Among the flowers, there were many sunflowers that were growing more and more vigorously. They were as tall as 2 people, and the seemingly ordinary flower bed on the ground was actually 3 times the height of ordinary flowers. It was a beautiful scene of red flowers and green grass. The battle-hardened lord sucked in a breath of cold air. A strong sense of disharmony made him instinctively feel threatened. The sense of danger, like needles on his back, made him instinctively want to break into a run. Isn't that the missing cartel? The flowers are eating him. Suddenly, the flowers turned in unison. It turned out that each flower had a bloody mouth, and that the fertilizer being chewed on was none other than their missing comrades. The petals only had a large mouth full of canine teeth. Although there were no eyes, everyone knew that they had locked onto them. It was the instinct of a predator meeting its natural enemy. I'll cover you. The strange scene sent chills down everyone's spine. Lord immediately gave the order. But at the next moment, the pitiful screams of the beastmen could be heard. The wooden vines on the ground transformed into coiled snakes that instantly hung the beastmen up. At the same time, the sunflowers opened their mouths wide and began hunting. Tyrannical strike. The bellowing bear king slammed the ground with all his might, his arms strong enough to shatter boulders. A violent gale began to tear the wooden vines apart, and the shockwave spread out. Saint Rank mysteries destroyed everything in front of him, and when it all came to an end, all he could hear was the screams of his comrades. Are you all right? Quick, this place is too creepy. We have to leave. He half-knelled on the ground, gasping for breath, and saw the despair on the faces of his comrades. When he turned back, he finally understood what had been wrong all this time. The small mountain not far away was slowly closing up, and the place he stood was caved in. Looking closely, it wasn't a small mountain, but a terrifying, bloody mouth. We've been hanging around this monster's mouth all this time? His final sigh was meaningless. The sky was already dark, and the mountainous man-eating flower king finally closed its mouth. With a crisp crack, Bear King Lord, who was only one step away from becoming the Beastman's sovereign, died prematurely. Humility of the seven virtues. However, perhaps it should be called by another name, carnivorous flower field covered in blood. Since the worst possible outcome had arrived, the black cat that was destined to bring misfortune finally woke up from its deep slumber. Huh, what a bunch of cute children. It's just that they need some time to spread out. Thanks to their fresh blood. Without so much fertilizer, they definitely wouldn't have grown so well. Humility? Virtue? It would be inconceivable if the witches who gave everyone headaches were able to create something positive. Humility wasn't just a single plant. It was a flower field composed of countless types of carnivorous plants. Their only characteristic was that they were highly aggressive. From the start of this battle, Amelia had planted a seed in Red Maple City, and how much this seed would grow would depend on how much fresh blood and souls it would take to nurture it. Roland's pride Omar was doubtlessly the king of all armies. In response to Omar's army abilities, Amelia had created this carnivorous flower field, which was also part of the army. These carnivorous flowers' special digestive juices were capable of easily melting bones, and the soul grass was capable of devouring souls, making undead mages' soul-summoning spells useless. The nutrients obtained from this battle would create even higher-level carnivorous flowers. Finally, after the gigantic Earth Devourer appeared, the battle should have ended. Doubtlessly, this battle had given Amelia far too much nutrients for her humility. Even though she hadn't entered the cycle of using battle to fuel battle, there were already several Earth Devourers that had been catalyzed and activated. The dangerous flower field had long since been waiting for new prey to arrive. Lord, the Bear King, had many such encounters. Oh my, it seems that after this battle, your ranking on the Calamity rankings will rise again. I won't be able to surpass Roland no matter how high I go. I'm far from being as insane, inhumane, and insane as he is. Heloise really wanted to comment on Amelia's behavior. Could Amelia not have such a regretful expression when saying such things? It was as if she was saying, I'm not as good as him. Did Amelia really want to compare who was more inhumane and had no bottom line? You're really comparing yourself to him in everything. Do you like him that much? Who? Who likes him? I hate him to death. When I obtain information on his techniques, I'm going to use him as fertilizer for my flowers. Whenever Roland was mentioned, the sly Amelia would become just like an elementary school student who had never been in love before. Heloise wanted to tease Amelia a bit more, but Amelia, who was so angry that she was stomping her feet, suddenly stopped and smiled towards the window. What's the matter? I didn't expect to catch such a big fish. Still, those behemoths that have gone out of control are going to be a bit troublesome. I'll send 2 little devourers over. Yep, don't kill them. They'll probably be rare, undead ingredients. Roland will definitely be delighted. Perhaps he'll even invite me to dissect them together. Ah, I really miss the old days. All right then. Amelia smiled shyly at this thought, while Heloise didn't know how to vent her desire to comment on Amelia's behavior. However, Amelia's expression suddenly changed greatly as she exclaimed in astonishment. My devourers too, and 4 were instantly killed. This feeling, nature magic's withering magic. It's those elves. Traitors would never be trusted. This was doubtlessly an ironclad rule on the battlefield. Since you could betray someone once, nobody could guarantee that you wouldn't betray someone a second time if you offer a higher price. No matter which world's history it was, traitors might obtain high statuses in the end, but they would never be truly trusted by the victors. A present from Cavendish? Just like Roland's letter, it was just another letter. Even the cinder was rose, but this time it was signed by the Abyss Prince Cavendish. All right then, there was no need to elaborate on the contents of the letter. It was nothing more than something along the lines of, we know all about your schemes. Didn't Roland only promise you the position of elf main god? Our price is even higher. Anyway, you haven't made your stance clear yet. If you return to the embrace of chaos, we'll let bygones be bygones, and I'll have those elf gods become your subordinates. Of course, there was also a bit of a threat at the end. It mentioned that Rose's divine realm was located in the bottomless abyss, and that the demon nobles might form a group to visit. Rose was doubtlessly the Dark Elf's ancestor and spiritual teacher. Loyalty and stupidity were synonymous among the Dark Elves. It was easy to imagine Rose's personality. Thus, Rose, who had already betrayed the elves once, betrayed them a second time without hesitation in the face of a higher price. Of course, this was only part of the reason. The deeper reason was that Rose wasn't satisfied with the divine title of Guardian God of the Northern Elves. She wanted the divine title of Guardian God of the North, and this had just fallen into Wumien's hands. Thus, if she didn't chase the humans out of the North, she wouldn't be able to become the true master of this land. Thus, after obtaining victory in the Elf Civil War, she unhesitatingly helped the Beastmen in their hour of need. Perhaps it should be said that since the original goal of the Alliance had been obtained, what she wanted even more was right in front of her. Thus, she directly turned hostile and snatched it away. Cavendish's letter only gave her a reason to strengthen her determination to betray them again. At this moment, Rose's new favorite, the high-level nature mage who killed the Devourer of Earth, was standing beside Almont and looking at everything in front of him with a sigh. I didn't expect that we would still return here after such a long journey. It's just that last time, you were our ally and acted like a proper person. This time, you're our ally's dog, licking your bones and puffing your mouth. Almont Blood Axe unceremoniously mocked the elven mage in front of him. He looked down on this cunning and untrustworthy man from the bottom of his heart, especially since he had betrayed his own tribe, even if he was once a king. Yes, this long-eared elven mage was indeed once a king, King Adrian of the Tassel Kingdom. But now, his skin had turned ash-black, and he was no longer a noble moon elf. Instead, he was a new species of fallen elf who had thrown himself into Rose's embrace. At this moment, the former elven king's face turned ashen as he faced the mocking laughter of the beastmen who he had looked down upon in the past. In the end, he turned around and left. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I did this for the continuation of my tribe. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. But unknowingly, his fingernails had already transformed into his own hands, and he didn't even realize that his hands were covered in blood. Chapter 188. The Seal of Unlimited Courage. It was a lousy name, but it left an important mark in history simply because it was Cavendish's sole imprint. As long as you firmly believe that you won't lose, you'll become stronger. Are you a hot-blooded main character? Also, what's with this name that sounds like it's a common imitation? Do you need me to think a new name for you? No need. Countless precedents have proven that if you, Roland, come up with a name, you'll definitely become the greatest shame of your life. I'm not that stupid. That was his reply back then, but from a certain standpoint, I wasn't wrong. This was truly an ability that only a main character in a legendary story would have. Never giving up. As long as one didn't admit defeat, one would become stronger and stronger. When faced with endless hopeless situations, when fate forced one to repeatedly face an army by oneself, this was indeed the most suitable ability. And when this ability was grasped by an ordinary person, there was a limit to how much courage a person could possess. There would probably be a limit to how strong it could be, and the amplification of power would also be limited. But in the hands of Cavendish, who didn't know fear or difficulty, this was the strongest soul imprint in the world. Saint Rank? A demon lord? When I die if my head is chopped off. As long as I die and feel pain, what's the difference? Cavendish, who was laughing maniacally on the battlefield, said so. Behind him, there was already a sea of blood and a mountain of corpses. In front of this insane god of slaughter, even the demons who didn't know what fear was were afraid. The beastmen who had the protection of the god of war were afraid. The human allied armies that were attacking the Mist Kingdom were also afraid. Legend rank beastmen? Behemoths? Won't they die if their heads are chopped off? As long as they bleed and feel pain, what's the difference between them and ordinary humans? Standing alone on top of the checkpoint, the young knight princess blocked the beastman's charge by herself. Her silver armor was already stained with the enemy's blood. Countless beastmen corpses lay on the ground, but they were unable to advance even an inch. And next to her long sword was the corpse of the Wolf King. Not far away, the behemoth with its head separated from its body was even more inconceivable. Next, the furious Princess Knight stood tall with her sword in hand. The Beastman warriors in front of her began to hesitate and retreat. 30 minutes ago, this seemingly weak girl had shouted such a thing. Countless Beastman warriors had rushed up to her, only to be slaughtered one by one. Next, 20 minutes ago, the behemoth that caused the earthquake let out a frenzied battle roar and charged forward, intending to strangle the human in front of it to death. In the end, its throat was sliced open and it died in agony. Next, 5 minutes ago, the pride of the werewolf race, the incomparably valiant Wolf King Sastero, had charged forward with his personal guards, but this time he was killed in a single slash. Next, when a silver-armored female knight roared angrily with her sword, the brave beastmen finally retreated. Perhaps they weren't afraid of sacrificing themselves, but at least their sacrifices were meaningful. Our princess, the most powerful princess in the world. Long live the Night Princess! In Renee's eyes, her blood was boiling, and the world in front of her began to blur. The cheers behind her seemed to be a lifetime ago, and there was only one thought lingering in her mind. I want power. I need more power. She was demanding power from her own soul, a soul imprint. When the light of law of great judgment illuminated the entire city, the gold-rank Law Knight Renee was further strengthened by the forbidden spell. Normally, a legend who was forcefully promoted to this level shouldn't have been able to form a soul imprint. But not only did she successfully form one, it was an unimaginably powerful soul imprint, the seal of unlimited bravery. That's right, the soul imprint that Renee formed was exactly the same as Cavendish's soul imprint, no matter in name or characteristics. Theoretically speaking, this was completely impossible. A soul imprint was the summary of a person's knowledge and life experience, and it was the cornerstone for one's future growth. It was impossible for a soul imprint to be exactly the same unless two people had the exact same life, the exact same personality, and the exact same soul. And not only did this strange thing that was theoretically impossible happen, there was an even stranger follow-up. Under normal circumstances, great judgment should have ended, and Renee's power level should have returned to its original state. But now, not only did Renee not return to the gold rank, she was actually continuously becoming stronger. She's definitely not an ordinary legend. I'm afraid that even a saint-rank warrior wouldn't be a match for her. Both her combat experience and power level are so perfect. I didn't expect Princess Renee to have hidden her strength so deeply. Experience, strength, combat intelligence, special abilities, and basic attributes were the weakest components of a powerhouse's overall strength. Not only was his basic attributes skyrocketing, but his combat experience, battlefield intuition, and other things that could only be accumulated over time were also skyrocketing at an inconceivable rate. Oh, so this continuous sword swinging is the profound meaning of Sword Saint. So aiming in the direction of the opponent's gaze and taking action first is the prediction that Brother Roland mentioned. This rate of growth had long surpassed the possibility of normal learning. It was as if this body had long since mastered all of this, but had forgotten about it. What was doing now was only awakening the memories that were engraved in the body. Amidst the cheers, Eliza was hesitating. Perhaps others only thought that Renee had finally displayed her power. But how could Eliza not know just how much power Renee had? It was completely inexplicable for her to grow to such an extent in an instant. Wolf King Sastero, a werewolf warrior that's almost saint rank. A behemoth that's even more difficult to deal with than a dragon on the ground, but he was actually killed with a single blow. Eliza already had a guess. She was hesitating whether she should risk giving up this incarnation and kill Renee in order to make that existence's conspiracy go down the drain. Suddenly, as if sensing Eliza's thoughts, Renee glanced at Eliza. The mysterious killing intent in her eyes made one tremble, and there was only one explanation for those murky yellow eyes. This feeling, as expected of the demon prince. Her black wings had already materialized, and a black devil was laughing maniacally in the void. All the conditions have been met. As that will descended, Renee's main bodies will become more and more hazy. She felt dizzy and wanted to fall asleep. I absolutely have to protect this city. This is related to the safety of the entire Northlands. My body is getting hotter and hotter, but I feel more and more energetic. Right? I want more power, more... Do you want power? Do you want to make a comeback in a hopeless situation? Do you want to obtain the great power to destroy everything? Vaguely, a will came from the depths of her bloodline, and a familiar voice echoed in her ears. In a daze, Rain gave a response. Can I obtain power and become even stronger? Big Brother Roland always says that I'm stupid. Perhaps I don't have the talent to become strong. No, don't underestimate yourself. What flows in your bloodline is the power of the highest. You have the talent to become even stronger. No, I should say that you were born to stand at the peak of the world. As long as you sign a contract with me, you'll have unparalleled power. Forget it. Big Brother Roland said that if anyone asked to sign a contract, I should directly reject them. You can't listen to the salespeople. They're all a bunch of scammers trying to trick you into signing a contract. Besides, my current state is fine too, right? Even though her consciousness was hazy, her hazy response caused that voice to be at a loss for words. Then, that voice spoke up again, this time in a rather hurried and exasperated tone. As a descendant of the mist, can't you have some backbone? With power, you can have everything. You can chase away those damned beastmen. You can protect your own people. You can become a hero in the eyes of the people. You can control your own destiny with your own hands. You can obtain everything you want. Can I have Roland praise me? He always says that I'm stupid, but Renee isn't stupid at all. Instantly, that voice was at a loss for words again, and its following tones sounded a little helpless. Sure, Roland will praise you. I promise. All right, I'll sign the contract. Following the will, the bloodline became the strongest connection between the two souls. A mysterious connection was established between the two souls, and a tremendous will descended upon this world. Oh my, it really wasn't easy coming up here. Reneno, Cavendish sighed for the first time since returning to this world. There were no coincidences in this world, only certainties. Many things that seemed like coincidences were actually meticulously prepared coincidences. After countless generations of inheritance, she ended up looking exactly the same as her ancestor. How could there be such a coincidence? From the very start, the person Renee resembled wasn't Roland, but Cavendish. That familiar face was the result of that existence in the chaos abyss manipulating her bloodline. From the very start, Renee was a spare body that Cavendish prepared for himself. From a certain standpoint, other than the difference in gender, this body was no different from when Cavendish was still a human. It was basically a magic version of a mutated clone, which was the most perfect way to carry his soul. The power of someone at the legend rank? This is much more useful than Fummel's body. The Abyss Prince was far too powerful. Just the descent of his will was enough to distort the world. Just a few minutes ago, his descent had completely destroyed Fummel's physical body. That was why Cavendish's physical body had to reach a certain standard in order to be able to freely move about in the mortal plane. With this soul imprint, I won't have to worry about combat strength, nor will I have to worry about my physical body collapsing for being overloaded. Reaching the legend rank and awakening an identical soul imprint was the core of all this preparation. An unlimited soul imprint would allow this physical body to rapidly grow and truly reach the standard of being able to carry a powerful will. From a certain standpoint, Roland's hard work had actually helped Cavendish's descent. If it wasn't for the system's rapid growth rate, Renee wouldn't have been able to reach the gold rank so quickly, nor would she have been able to instantly reach the legend rank with the help of great judgment, fulfilling all the requirements for Cavendish's will to descend. At this moment, Renee devoured all the black mist around her. She stood up, and the space around her began to distort. When Renee opened her eyes, the entire world changed. The snow suddenly stopped, but countless dark clouds blocked out the bright moonlight. Thunder and lightning continued to whip the world, but the nearby snowy mountain suddenly began to tremble. Judging from the flames on the mountain peak, it seemed like it was about to become an active volcano again. The restless earth began to tremble. A new earthquake was brewing. Countless birds and beasts escaped from their hiding places. They were fleeing for their lives because they knew that Armageddon was upon them and that it would be impossible to escape. Just her existence was enough to change the world. Even if she was only a clone of her will, this was the power of a main god. At this moment, Cavendish suddenly unsheathed his sword, raised his head, and laughed at the assassin who was attacking him from above. "Roland, I told you that we would meet soon. You didn't expect this, did you?" Roland's sacred sword drew a silver arc in the air. The two silver swords viciously clashed against each other. The younger brother smiled, while the naked older brother angrily rebuked him. "Renee, I told you not to believe the salespeople's words. Those packages sound nice, but they're all bluffing. Look, even your voice has become a man's, and your body is still that of a woman's. It's so disgusting that you're neither a man nor a woman. If you want to be a man, just tell me. I have the secret potion of the spring of the drowned man. It's painless, harmless, and has no side effects. You'll see it in 1 second." All right then. Cavendish's smiling face immediately became awkward after hearing this completely unexpected answer. Chapter 189. It was as if time didn't leave any traces at all. It was as if fate had returned to its original point. 377 years later, in the territory of their former country, these two brothers who had been away from home for several hundred years were reunited once again. Unfortunately, I didn't have any intentions of reminiscing about the past. My longsword represented my will. Before the silver holy sword could even descend, Carwins waved his hand, and a berserk gale immediately blew me far away. The difference is too great. Even though I had long since anticipated the difference in power, it was still quite depressing to be sent flying so casually as if I was fanning myself. Although Carwin's physical body had only reached the level of legend, his soul imprint, which was like a cheat, was far too shameless. It allowed Carwins to wield power far beyond that of an incarnation. And the power output of a main god's incarnation, coupled with the most suitable physical body, was something that even a true god might not be able to deal with even if they risked their lives to descend into the mortal world. As for me, I had only just entered the silver rank. I had only forcefully increased my power by a large amount of fate points in order to deal with Omderoken. I still needed a large amount of time to consolidate my power. "Roland, do you still not understand that power is everything? The current you is just as pitifully weak as you were in the past. If I had my current power back then, I wouldn't have ended up like I did." Cavendish was quite proud of himself as he spoke. His boastful attitude and power were exactly the same as before. "You're already so old. Stop being so chinibyu." Although I was filled with dissatisfaction, I sheathed my Roland's sacred sword. The reason? Besides, I still had many questions that I wanted to ask. Based on my understanding of Roland, he would likely answer me directly if I asked. Is it really that fun to help another species destroy the Mist Kingdom again? This was doubtlessly a test, but Cavendish shrugged with an expression that said he didn't care. "What does it have to do with me? It's not like I did it. Do you think that I'm a mastermind? You're overthinking things." Hearing that, even though I was slightly surprised, such a reply was within my expectations. Cavendish had never been one to lie. If he said that he didn't do it, then it was most likely true. The current two royal families are my descendants. For demons, bloodline descendants are rare treasures. Who knows, my next backup body will come from them. Why would I kill them for no reason? In fact, without my help, Donglon would have been destroyed countless times over. How is this possible? 2 years ago, when Donglon was about to be destroyed, the enemy had already attacked the capital, but they still managed to fight back. Do you think Renee can do it? Cavendish rolled his eyes, his face full of disdain. In a way, he was also very dissatisfied with the recent misdescendants. Hearing that, I was speechless. I knew that Cavendish was referring to the time when the Beastmen attacked. At that time, the previous king was killed, and Renee urgently led the army. However, She displayed her prowess and chased the beastmen for thousands of miles, winning the title of Night Princess. I asked the person who experienced it. Renee was indeed impressive. Even though there were no records of her personally taking action, she managed to sweep away the beastman's attack with her army's coordination and outstanding judgment. However, it was a pity that she seemed to have used up all of her talent. After that, her performance was average. After the incident, I also asked her about it. How did you win? Actually, I'm not too sure either. At that time, I felt that my mind was extremely clear and ideas popped up one after another. Then, I followed them and won. Big brother Roland, don't you think that I have a lot of potential? A genius? Yeah, you have a lot of potential. A genius. At that time, other than nodding silently with a blank expression, what else could I do? But now, it seemed that the truth back then was completely different from what everyone knew. The truth was that Cavendish personally led her to victory through the guidance of her bloodline, and it was because of this that Renee became famous. And the Demon Prince wouldn't do anything that would make him lose money. Perhaps it was all for the sake of the physical body before him. Then what about the Beastmen this time? They came south of their own volition to seize territory and reclaim their homeland. In their eyes, this is only natural, the long-cherished wish of their ancestors. Naturally, it has nothing to do with me. Elves? That's even less of a concern. You know that I'm allergic to those long-eared sissies. They're seeking their own deaths, so who else can they blame? Rose? That wasn't it just a little joke that I played on you? You wrote a letter asking her to betray you, and I wrote one to see if I could make her betray me again. I didn't expect that female spider to be so shameless. Sigh. She even caused me to lose quite a bit of money. TSK. I still underestimated those black-skinned be*asterisk stars. The Earth Elemental Planes Dimensional Door? That's something I instructed my subordinates to do. It's also for my boss, the Chaos Abyss, to do some odd jobs. Count it as preparation for the future. Still, it doesn't have anything to do with the Mist Kingdom, so it doesn't matter if it succeeds or not. At any rate, the revival of the Earth Elemental Gods has already fulfilled the requirements of the will of the Chaos Abyss. I couldn't help but be rendered speechless. Cavendish was quite direct and told me everything. But since he was being so honest, I didn't know what to say anymore. All right, since it's rare for us to meet, how about we find a place to have a drink? As he said this, the Cavendish smiled mysteriously as he raised his glass. Not only did I become even angrier, we were fighting so hard here, but in this brat's eyes, it was as if we were just playing an uninteresting game. It didn't matter if he won or lost, as long as he was happy. This comparison naturally made me angry. Fine, as long as you answer my last question. What's going on with these descendants that are left on the surface? What exactly is your scheme? Scheme? Isn't it your favorite? If I want something, I'll directly take it. It's still too early for the elemental tide's density. Let's talk about proper business later. I'll plant a seed, and when it germinates, I'll be able to use my physical body to travel to the mortal plane. Besides, how would such a small skirmish have anything to do with me? I'm a chaos elemental god, so I won't interfere in such a low-level battle. Relax, I have no interest in any of the countries in Ike for the time being. I'll save the best wine for last. Perhaps we'll have a fight in the end, but it definitely won't be now. Carwin's words infuriated everyone. He was truly treating this as a joke. The Holy War had only just begun, so it was impossible for powerful existences to descend here. Carwin's words were somewhat reasonable, but his nonchalant attitude this time was actually quite infuriating. As for those descendants, isn't that quite normal? You're already so old, so it'll be strange if you're still a virgin without a woman. I think I said something wrong. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Cavendish's strange smile had no sincerity in his apology. He really knew how to provoke me. So what if you're a virgin? Virgins are pure and beautiful. So can't pure and kind virgins be allowed to exist? This is ugly discrimination. This is unreasonable prejudice. This is the most inhumane form of sexism. I strongly request that virgins and virgins be treated the same. There's no foundational difference between the two. So why is there such a huge difference in treatment? If it wasn't for the fact that I was trying my best to remain serious, I would probably be furious right now. After so many years, whenever I thought about how I looked exactly the same back in the day, with my status being slightly higher than mine and my handsomeness being slightly higher than mine, it turned out that I was slightly less popular with women. Fine, don't slap me in the face. I admit that there was a huge difference, but that didn't mean that what he said was true. A nearly 400-year-old virgin would definitely be quite strange. Cavendish shrugged. He probably understood his older brother's craziness better than anyone else. At this time, all I needed to do was ignore him. Without my financial support, that brat Charles wouldn't have been able to successfully establish his own country. From a certain standpoint, I'm more concerned about this than you are. The younger generation will have their own lives, so I don't intend to interfere too much. However, providing a physical body for me to descend into and allow me to freely wander around the mortal plane should be the price and obligation that they should pay. If Cavendish really had some other scheme apart from the fact that he wanted me to have fun, it was probably to harvest the seeds that I had already prepared. Huh, you're talking nonsense again. Leave Renee's physical body behind. I don't care about anything else. I finally found a reason to vent my displeasure. So, I raised my sword and blocked him. Cavendish kept giving excuses, as if he had no interest in the mortal plane at all. However, how could I possibly allow a demon lord like him to do as he pleased in this world? With the current you? Cavendish pouted in disdain. He instantly saw through my current power level. Even if I just slashed at him, I probably wouldn't be able to injure him. How about adding me in? Eliza's voice sounded behind my head. The Flame Sea Marquise's right arm was coiled by a flame dragon, while her left arm was covered in frost. The current Eliza had already released a portion of her seal the moment Roland appeared, and was prepared to risk her life at any moment. Marquise Eliza? Hey, don't be so serious. I'm really just here for sightseeing. If you were to go all out, I might not be able to keep this physical body of mine, and I would just have to return to the Chaos Abyss, but the descendants of the mist would come to an end. Don't worry. If the descendants of the mist are gone, I will try my best to give birth to a few more. My ideal family is 1 son and 2 daughters. Dear, do you think that 3 children are enough? If not, I can consider having a few more. Eliza, who was smiling sweetly, continued to release her seal while losing her moral integrity. One side of her eyes was a red ruby while the other side turned into the icy blue of the deep sea. At this moment, when the seal had reached its limit, Eliza was prepared to destroy everything around her in one strike. In her heart, the demon Prince Cavendish in front of her was too dangerous and a huge threat to Roland. Thus, even if she had to risk the destruction of her physical body, she would use her full strength to bring him back to the Chaos Abyss. However, I stopped her because I had a better choice on hand. You see this sword, right? Do you know what it's used for? If you know what's good for you, then obediently throw down your weapon and surrender. Summon Valkyrie, limiting the Mist royalty. Even if you summon the first Mist King, I wouldn't be afraid. Wait, are you planning to summon that person? At the mention of that king, even the fearless Carwins had a panicked expression on his face. Yes, the one I want to summon is that ancient king from 400 years ago. He is destined to be your nemesis. In front of his great power, you, Cavendish, are just a weak child. He is also your nemesis. Stop it. You are causing both of us to suffer. In the end, there will only be no winner. I want both of us to suffer. So what if we die together? As long as you aren't having a good time, it's enough. Now die. All popular men should die. Summon of the king. An invisible roulette spun in the air. Even though it was a random summon and waiting for the heroic souls to respond, I had a premonition that the ones who would respond to the summon would be 2 people, because this was the reason why the Roland sacred sword had to be awakened in advance. Descendant of the mist, Barthelot. Perhaps he isn't a powerful king. Among the ancestors, his martial arts and strategies are only average. However, Cavendish, he is definitely your nemesis, because I am your father. I am your father. Yes, the bearded middle-aged man in a black cloak is Cavendish and I's biological father. He is also the only existence capable of disciplining Cavendish. Cavendish, what are you doing? Why do you have breasts and curves? Have you become neither a man nor a woman? At that moment, Cavendish's face was filled with embarrassment. This reaction, why does it feel so familiar? Should I say, as expected of father and son? From the very start, my focus and sharp observation skills were used wrongly. But at this moment, I, who was secretly laughing, was also implicated. Roland, where are your clothes? Since when did you learn to run naked? How many times have I said that as a crown prince, etiquette and teachings are more important than anything else? Look at you, you even learned a tattoo. Were those scribbles on your body? At this moment, I remembered that I was still naked. No wonder when the cold wind blew, it felt so cold down there. Roland, I already told you. You're trying to take me down with you. Once the old man starts lecturing, he won't stop for less than 2 hours. So what if I'm happy? All right then, looking at my nostalgic father's endless lecturing, I actually had a headache as well. But apart from lowering my head and enduring, what else could I do? In the next moment, smoke suddenly rose, and Carwins had already disappeared without a trace. Without a doubt, he had already escaped. Honestly, now that the old man is out, he's no longer in the mood. I'm going to fulfill my contract first, and then I'll catch up with you. And at this moment, I once again shot myself in the foot. I was left behind to face the angry father alone. But from a certain standpoint, my strategic goal had been achieved. In front of my father, Cavendish would definitely restrain himself. And at this moment, on the Borealis's magical map, the symbol representing Rene instantly rushed out of the city. Oh my, you want to get Roland to praise you? Then if you want to do that, you really are a troublesome junior. Chapter 190. The weak are prey to the strong, and the strong survive. This was probably the foundational difference between the goddess of order Astria and the goddess of chaos Cynthia. Astria believed that individual strength wasn't the most important. The weak and the strong should rely on each other and make up for each other's deficiencies under the gods' rules. That was the most perfect form of society. For Cynthia, having children compete with each other, allowing the strongest existence to survive, and providing the best resources to the children with the most potential was the most perfect world. The difference in ideals finally caused the two sides to break up. However, this also caused the two sides' creations to develop in completely different directions. For example, the Order faction's human society. At the very least, humans weren't all that different from each other when they were born. Everyone couldn't possibly live without society. Even kings couldn't live without farmers. And if they really had to compare who was stronger, perhaps even the venerated emperor might not be able to defeat a farmer who fought with all his might. If humans were unable to represent true order, then angels, who were top-level creatures of order, should be able to. Their future jobs were decided at birth. All of their lives would follow their predetermined path to serve the community. Although they seemed perfect, they actually lacked flexibility. Without the unknown, there would be no respect for the future. Even angels, who generally lacked emotions, had many problems. Otherwise, fallen angels wouldn't exist in the lower planes. Meanwhile, the Chaos faction was a completely different matter. Demons killed and devoured each other. Low-level demons followed the undisguised rules of the jungle. As long as one's power level reached a certain level, they would be able to obtain the corresponding status. In this world where everyone was trying to climb up, perhaps your boss wouldn't be as smart as you, but he would definitely be better at fighting than you. The weak should die, and the strong should obtain everything. If I'm not living a good life, that's because I'm not strong enough. It's enough that I'm living happily. Why think so much? Perhaps that was all that most demons had in their heads. This was also why other intelligent creatures said that demons were idiots with muscles in their heads. However, that wasn't actually the case. High-level demons generally had memories from 2 lives. Their accumulated experience brought them sufficient knowledge and experience. It wasn't that they didn't have brains. They were just too lazy to use their brains. After all, there weren't many species that could defeat them with their muscles. Idiot, perhaps I can't win against you in a verbal argument, but I can destroy you personally. Whenever someone tried to reason with a demon, that demon would use its own method to do so. It was likely that even if you were decapitated, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. From a certain standpoint, Cavendish, who had always been immature, was indeed quite compatible with the Chaos faction. Fallen demons weren't brainwashed. It was likely that Cavendish's personality from the past was still the same. He would conveniently help his descendants establish their own country simply because he found it pleasing to the eye. And if the Mist Kingdom was destroyed again in the future, that would only be in accordance with the law of survival of the fittest. He would probably shrug his shoulders and say something like how regretful before turning around and forgetting everything. Last time, he was probably because the seed had sprouted and he, Cavendish to him, Beastman, of Beastmen, Beastmen of B, right? And faction beast, Chaos main god, good, of Beastoff creation, re-good, Beastoff, of Beastoff chaos of chaos. After thinking through all this, I actually relaxed. After all, a main god casually strolling around in front of me would have far too great of an impact on the overall battle situation. As long as Carwins still cared about their past relationship, at the very least, he wouldn't stand on the other side. The old man's appearance added another lock to the situation. After all, as long as they weren't brainwashed and controlled, not every prince would be crazy enough to kill his father and destroy his country. In most cases, no matter how naughty a child was, even if he had the ability to overturn the heavens, he would still instinctively fear his strict father who had accumulated his authority for many years. Roland, did you hear what I said? What are you thinking about right now? You've disgraced our ancestors, your knight's etiquette and royal upbringing. Also, you're clearly the older brother. Didn't I ask you to discipline your younger brother? Look at what you've done. When Cavendish changed his sex, I didn't discuss it with you. Why didn't you stop him? All right then. When Carwins decided to run away without any sense of loyalty, all of my angry rebukes landed on my head. This nagging that had been delayed for more than 300 years made me nostalgic, but I also didn't know what to do. Damn it, when the old man starts scolding someone, he won't listen to explanations at all. That bastard Cavendish. He actually left me to suffer by myself. While Roland was enjoying the love from his elders, Renee had already arrived outside the city. She was about to fulfill her promise. How much do I have to do in order to receive Roland's praise? From a certain standpoint, promises that weren't set were the most difficult to fulfill. As a demon, Cavendish could indeed go back on his word. There were already countless souls who had lost everything due to making deals with existences from the lower planes. But as an ancestor, he still felt bad for deceiving his own descendant. Not to mention, Cavendish was intending to rent this place for a long period of time. In that case, it was necessary to maintain a good relationship with the landlord. Then, I'll pay a little as room fees. I've decided. You're the one, Rose. Haha, this is also my main mission, to take care of those idiots who don't know any better. But even if I don't say it, Roland should have guessed it. From a certain standpoint, time had indeed left its mark on Cavendish. At the very least, in the past, Cavendish wouldn't have been so scheming. He wasn't lying. He really did want to come to the mortal world for a stroll, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He just wanted to take a stroll and complete a small mission. True gods also had their own rules. The gods wouldn't directly participate in the mortal world's battles. This was a requirement of the world's endurance, as well as an unspoken rule to prevent the true god from directly destroying everything in a holy war. And during the holy war, if the true gods interfered too early, or even directly descended, it would directly cause the war to escalate and the situation to spiral out of control. From a certain standpoint, if it wasn't for the elemental god Omderokin's participation in the war, Rose's ambush wouldn't have occurred, and true gods wouldn't have fallen so quickly. Without a doubt, both the Forest Guardian God and the Spider Queen had obviously violated the rules. This was like a fight between two kindergartners. The loser invited his primary school older brother to fight, while the other suffered a loss and invited his middle school older cousin. Then, both sides continued to invite people to fight, and the fight escalated. In the end, it became a battle of life and death between the two families. Perhaps the final battle will happen in the end, but it won't be decided now. Naughty children who don't follow the rules will be hung up and beaten. If the parents of that family had appeared earlier and discovered that their child was being unreasonable, they would have given their child a slap. Perhaps this would have stopped the cycle. And right now, Cavendish was a slap. At the very least, on the surface, Rose was still a part of the Chaos faction. Even if someone wanted to slap her, it wouldn't be the Order faction's turn. Oh my, I'm so angry this time. It would seem that just a slap isn't enough. If Rose's betrayal wasn't punished, perhaps the next traitor would be born very soon. And not only did her second betrayal not earn her the forgiveness of the will of the Chaos Abyss, it even caused the Order faction to angrily give up on protecting her. I've seen plenty of fence-sitters and fence-sitters, but I've never seen anyone jump back and forth from the very beginning. Rose, do you think the main gods on both sides are blind or dead? You stood out too early, so consider yourself unlucky. Originally, that idiot elf god's crime of descending without permission was greater than yours, but he's already dead. That's why I'm using you as an example to others. Of course, Rose was doubtlessly the greatest threat to the Northlanders and the Mist Kingdom. It was unknown if some personal grudges and desires were mixed in with her official duties. A meteor streaked across the sky. When this meteor landed, the Spider Queen, who was preparing to steal the Northland's guardian god's divine concept, was destined to meet misfortune. Right, it's rare for us to be here, and it's still early. Let's find a place to kill some time. I'm already sick of succubi and half-blood demons, so why don't we find something new to have fun with? Beautiful and slender female elves and cute and healthy half-blood beast women. Beauties, I'm coming. Cough, my bad, let's do it again. Beauties, I'm coming. Cough. Perhaps before Cavendish made up his mind to get down to business, Rose would still be able to act arrogantly for a period of time. By the way, after this series of events, it seemed that a certain princess's reputation as the Lily Princess was destined to become more and more popular. As night began to fall, the pitch-black beasts began their final banquet. This land had been bled enough, and everything was coming to an end. In the snowy Northlands, a strange team was currently advancing in the snow, even though it was still snowing heavily. Even though they were all elves, they were split into two groups. The dark-skinned elves at the back were arrogant, while the grayish-black elves at the front had depressed expressions. Greyblood elves were the new name for these grayish-black elves. These 30,000-plus elves had confused expressions, as if they were walking corpses in a dream. After they joined a new master under the leadership of their king, that new master unhesitatingly sent them out to attack the current master of the Northlands. Are we still going to fight to the death against the humans? After circling one more time, the Greyblood elves returned to their original location. But as Almont said, previously, you were our equal allies, but now you're truly nothing more than dogs. If Rose was a traitor who had lost the trust of both factions because she had repeatedly betrayed them twice, then these Greyblood elves didn't even know how many times they had betrayed them. Betrayed their human allies and the Order faction? Yes, they had been from the very beginning. Betrayed the elven gods' expectations? That was the moment they abandoned the Northland's battlefield and urgently returned to their homeland. Betrayed all the Northland's elves? Their disgusting grayish-black skin was the best evidence. When they betrayed the Northland's elves on the battlefield, the disbelief and hatred of the betrayed Northland's elves were still deeply etched in their memories. And now, they once again betrayed their own elves who were suffering from calamity to participate in a battle that was meaningless to them regardless of whether they won or lost. That was why their faces were filled with fatigue, and they were tormented by guilt and pain with every step they took. It was no wonder that they were so exhausted. Warriors who had lost their beliefs and those they were protecting? How were they any different from walking corpses? Suddenly, a familiar song drifted over. It was a song that the Tassel Kingdom would play during every year-end celebration. It was the Tassel Kingdom's homecoming, and it symbolized the end of the year, as well as the reunion of the tribe. The JH to JD ka suad as the distant relatives, where exactly have you gone? We miss you in our homeland, FRE to LD CAD. Are the ancient trees at home still green? That familiar lake and spring scenery always reminds me of my childhood. Back then, the sky was so blue. Back then, the elves had a civil war, and the flames of war never stopped. In order to find a place for her elves to live in, the legendary moon elf bard Tassel traveled through countless mountains, rivers, and oceans. After experiencing countless hardships, she finally chose a territory in the Northlands. Here, she signed a contract with the forest guardian god, Clairladen. Then, she happily embarked on a journey back home. Unfortunately, the journey back home was just as long as the journey here. Tassel, who was physically and mentally exhausted, was unable to return home in the end. She collapsed on the way back. Fortunately, the news was brought back by her messenger pigeon. In the end, her elves fulfilled the promise she made with her and transformed the northern mountain range into an elven paradise. Finally, in order to commemorate this legendary bard, the elves rewrote the lyrics of the song she had composed when she was homecoming, creating a classic homecoming song. In the past, during the annual celebrations, the princess would sing this song for everyone, and they would sing in chorus to celebrate the hard-won beauty of today's life. JD ad, Dal Dada, 80. My family, I've finally found the home of my dreams. Our new home is in the Northlands. And now, that familiar song was echoing in the mountain range. This song was about home and memories, and it evoked the gray blood elves' pain that had been suppressed in their hearts. The last time they heard this song, their loved ones who had reunited with them yesterday were still there. After all, every family had lost a few loved ones in this series of calamities. That song, it's exactly the same. Impossible. The soft whimpers finally turned into cries. Some people recognized the familiar voice of the singer, but that person was probably already dead. Your Highness Swana. No, it's impossible. The sharp-eyed scouts had already discovered the truth. There was a figure singing on the mountain range, and judging from the translucent figure that was faintly discernible, it was the legendary Banshee. The elves' faces instantly paled. The ironclad truth was right in front of them, and they instantly understood many things. Kill her! Amidst the cries and cries, the dark elf general's angry roar was extremely eye-catching, and his order was carried out. Countless enchanted arrows were knocked, and in the next instant, that fatal rain of swords would fatally destroy that lonely figure. No, don't! Finally, some of the gray blood elves couldn't take it anymore and started arguing with the dark elves, trying to snatch those fatal enchanted silver arrows. But it was too late. The dark elf marksman had already mercilessly shot out a rain of arrows. Just as the newborn Banshee was about to die, a miraculous scene suddenly occurred. A flaming phoenix flew across the sky, and all the arrows were burned to ashes. Several magic spells were also blocked by its flaming wings, and when the phoenix landed, it transformed into a female general wielding a flaming divine sword. Behind that cliff, countless figures appeared. It was the familiar silhouette of an army, and on the surface, it was an elite battle group from the underworld. Although I didn't plant this tree, and I didn't open this mountain, it's still impossible to pass through here, even if you intend to pay the toll, the red-haired girl said. The red-haired young lady said. Although her words were a little confusing, none of the dark elves dared to refute her. After all, this was the great figure who had the highest possibility of unifying the underground world, Phoenix Annihilate. Another familiar voice caused the gray elves to tremble in shock. Perhaps some shocking tragedies were about to be exposed to the light of day. My brethren, you've been deceived. My death, that sudden declaration of war, it's all a scheme of an evil schemer. Chapter 191. No matter how long the night was, it would eventually pass. After winter came spring, when all living things would recover. But sometimes, the dawn after a long night would bring despair instead of hope. The world that was covered in snow wasn't always so beautiful. Sometimes, it would even make the corpses that froze to death in the long night seem even more frightening. When the first glimmer of dawn disappeared, the people who had been fighting in the dark for half the night discovered that this difficult night had come to an end. But those who were able to see the first glimmer of dawn were the lucky ones who were favored by fate. The Beastmen army furiously increased their numbers without caring about their losses. The inner city had already fallen, and all the human defenders had retreated to the third and final line of defense. This was a temporary defensive structure made of sandbags and earthen walls. This was also the city's final lifeline. The catapults outside the city had already stopped firing. It was impossible for them to accurately shoot from such a long distance. But now that visibility and the snow had stopped, the Beastmen's aerial knights could once again soar into the blue sky. It seemed that the Beastmen had already secured victory, but the current Beastman, King Almont Bloodaxe, didn't seem happy at all that victory was within his grasp. Instead, his face was filled with fatigue. More than 70% of our warriors were killed, and countless more were heavily injured. Only 2 of the great tribe leaders returned, and both of them were heavily injured. Lord Amar died in the previous attack on the city. Now, Lord 1, Wolf King Sastero, and Lord Lund have all died in battle. Lord Kagoma is also missing, and he's probably... Bad news after bad news caused Almont to hesitate even more, but nobody could blame him. That was because the bandage on his right arm that had been chopped off at the shoulder was still leaking blood. Almont, who had lost an arm, was also heavily injured. As the great tribe leader of the allied tribes, he didn't have any obligation to avoid battle. The reason why he was able to survive was not only because of his outstanding personal combat strength, but also because he was sufficiently lucky. No matter what generation it was, cruel coastal battles were always the most fatal and dangerous. Even legend rank warriors could suddenly die in chaotic battles. A sudden hidden rock or arrow could cause a saint rank mage to collapse. The pitch black night and the heavy snow made all this chaos even worse. We finally made it to daybreak. Almont sighed, but the survivors nodded in agreement. In a night fight, the unlucky ones would be killed by a stray bullet, while the lucky ones would be able to see their opponent and fall under a flurry of swords. As for the cunning and scheming Fox clan chief one, he was a classic example of unlucky people. He had been hit by a stray bullet from his own catapult, and 2 of his personal guards had died along with him. The scene was too horrible to look at. In fact, the orcs had unknowingly committed a great taboo in sieging a city, and that was never force your opponent into a corner. The other world did not have the right to surround the enemy and attack them at the same time. It gave the enemy a chance to escape, and it was also a buffer to prevent himself from being forced to die with the enemy. That night, the heavy snow and the besieging orcs blocked all the escape routes. The humans had nowhere to retreat to. They did not even have the chance to escape. Even a corner dog would jump over a wall. How could those well-trained soldiers just sit back and watch their deaths be meaningless? If we can't escape death in the end, then we should at least fall down like a warrior and at least drag one of our opponents down with us. The allied army that had been forced to their limits exploded with astonishing combat strength. The fear of losing their city finally transformed into hatred for their mortal enemy. Their boldness to die together with the Beastmen, along with the most important geographical advantage in urban warfare, caused the ratio of casualties on both sides to change. The Beastmen suffered heavy losses. Meanwhile, Amelia's Death Garden continued to create death traps one after another. The human warriors that suddenly attacked from the houses were able to kill at least one of them. Behrman Lund wasn't the first, nor would he be the last. Meanwhile, the Beastmen's reinforcements had long since stopped. Now that the battle had entered the chaotic darkness of the night, their crude siege weapons had become weapons of mass destruction that didn't differentiate between friend and foe. No matter which generation it was, being mistakenly killed by one's own allies would be the most unacceptable way to die. Large-scale sorcery and tactical magic? With a visibility range of less than 10 meters, using these spells would have a 50-50 chance of killing both allies and the enemy. What was even worse was the silent and deadly cold. In this kind of damned weather where even a drop of water would turn into ice, the damage to one's clothing would be fatal, not to mention a wound. The extreme cold numbed the warrior's sense of pain. Small wounds that were easily overlooked in the snow wouldn't become infected, but the loss of blood and stamina would be the most fatal. If these wounds weren't discovered and treated in time, there would be far too many who would suddenly collapse while walking. While the Beastmen had forced the northern human allied army to the brink, the Beastmen had also forced themselves to the brink. The long list of the Beastmen's dead was incredibly shocking. It could be said that the Beastmen had suffered heavy casualties, and every family was in mourning. More than 70% of the Beastmen tribes would need to reorganize after the war. Just their current losses were enough to announce that the Beastmen's ambition to return to the Central Plains had failed. Even if they won in the end, they would need a long time to recuperate. But if Almont and the Beastmen were given a choice, even if they knew beforehand that this was an unacceptable loss, they would probably still make the same decision. Victory is right before our eyes. Take them down, and we'll become the new masters of the Northlands. When the crucial point of victory had appeared, how could the Beastmen let it go? But if this strategic goal of conquering the Northlands was placed 3 months ago, the Beastmen would probably be mocked for their lack of ambition and courage. After all, at that time, the Beastmen only wanted to return to their ancestral land and fight their way to San Antonio. Unknowingly, the harsh reality hit the Beastmen in the head. Their current strategic goal was to conquer the entire Northlands. The Beastmen now no longer had the ambition to conquer all the human countries. Just the seemingly weak northern countries and the reinforcements from San Antonio had forced them to this point. They had already lost the courage to challenge the human super-empires. Of course, there were still some discrepancies on this point. After this battle, the other countries would probably re-evaluate the combat prowess of the northern lands, especially the astonishing combat prowess that the East Mist communal country displayed in this battle. Perhaps, even the harshest military critic wouldn't put the label of a weak country on its head. Knight Princess Renee, the new generation of magical swordsmen called the 4 elemental swordcasters, the gigantic self-destructing war puppets called Roland Titan, the floating airship Borealis, the battlefield harvester Train King, and so on. All these new concepts and weapons would definitely allow the Mist Kingdom to rise again in the Northlands. Military strength also represented the right to speak in foreign affairs and politics. With the strength displayed in this battle, it was possible that Roland's Mist Alliance would become a reality. And on another level, when the news of the veteran leader Immortal Orc being forced to the brink in his own territory spread, the familiar name of Roland Mist would definitely attract new attention after being silent for more than 100 years. Of course, the prerequisite was that they could survive this current crisis. The Beastmen are here again. I exhaled a white mist as I shook my holy sword, causing the blood to fall off. This indestructible sword was now clean once more. For the Northland's human allied armies, which had already endured a bitter night of battle, neither the sky nor the snow stopping were good news. This meant that the Beastmen could reorganize themselves, and those damned aerial cavalry and siege equipment could be reactivated. Perhaps they would be able to take a breather for a period of time, but the final battle would end with the complete annihilation of one side. Middle-sized catapults that could move were slowly pushed into the city. The bloodied elite soldiers bandaged their wounds and watched everything with high vigilance. Even the wind caused the tattered curtains to flutter, causing these veterans who had survived the bloody night to throw their javelins. At the same time, the commander of the allied armies, Black Bear, Einro, was right behind me. Or perhaps I should say that he was lying not far behind me. The Beastmen didn't only know how to charge head-on. The cat-human assassin had found the command center, and even though he was rescued in time, he was lucky enough to survive. The one-eyed general was now completely blind. He had been stabbed 3 times in the right side of his abdomen, and he was so heavily injured that he couldn't even get up. But fortunately, he didn't need to command anymore. All he had to do was struggle to shout out a single word: defend, defend. We have no way out. If we want to survive, we have to kill all these beasts. Defend. Behind us are the injured, the widows, the elderly, and the young. Defend. If we lose this battle, our country isn't even ready for war yet, and they will lose their land. Our families will be dragged into the endless flames of war. Yes, defend. At this point in the battle, there was no need for any strategies or arrangements. All they needed to do was carry out their will. Defend. One street was lost. The next street was already prepared with a new defense line. A temporary defense wall was flattened. The next wall was already built. An entire squadron was massacred, and a gap appeared in the defense line. The old man and woman, who had just been commoners, picked up the weapons on the ground and silently repaired the gap. Perhaps humanity's end and defeat will eventually come. But the beastmen, do you want to take over this city and open up a path to the northern countries? Let the blood of the brave warriors here run out first. The young men with tense expressions didn't say anything else, but they used their actions to tell the arrogant beastmen what the northerners were and what the people of the mist were. Winter is here, but aren't we northerners used to winter long ago? No matter how cold it is, it's not that difficult. We just need to endure it, hug each other for warmth, play with the dogs, and spring will come, right? Even though he couldn't see it anymore, Einro still laughed in disdain. He was referring to the dogs when he said play with the dogs, and judging from the warriors' laughter, it was obvious. When the sun rose slightly higher, judging from the footsteps and the sound of catapults on the street corner, the final moment had arrived. At this moment, even I was out of options. All of my chips had been placed on the table. Antun was too far away, so I couldn't count on him. I had sent Anne's army to stop the Dark Elves, and Shilua's reinforcements had been out of my control from the very start. I had also used all of my new weapons of war. I had played all of my cards. That damned Embark. If it wasn't for him, Embark's final attack had indeed hit our vitals. If Red Maple City fell here, I wouldn't be able to turn the situation around. Sigh, if only this battle could drag on for another 10 days. Unfortunately, there were no ifs on the battlefield. Countless famous generals had died on the battlefield because of a single moment's difference. Accidents and misfortune would always accompany the losers. Heaven and hell were often just a tiny bit apart. I propped up my holy sword and stood up. Ever since Renee's unexpected departure, I had temporarily taken over the position of a mid-level commander. But at this point, I had even used the other 2 summoning abilities of my holy sword, but there was nothing I could do. My diligence and self-control are all dead, damn moon elves. Only their natural control abilities are so disgusting. The green-haired witch was in a rather sorry state. Her mana had been completely used up in this battle. 2 of the 7 virtues that she treasured so much, of which there were only 3, had died in battle. It would seem that she was at her limits. The Moon Elves were originally the Elven Empire's priestess species. They were skilled at communicating with the gods and true gods, borrowing the power of the gods to use all sorts of powerful divine arts. The original guardian god of the Moon Elves was the guardian god of the forest. The nature priests who had controlled the divine power of the forest for thousands of years were the most skilled at sowing seeds and controlling the forest. It was their natural duty to eliminate all unnatural and abnormal plants. That was why Amelia had met her natural enemy when her opponent was a nature priest like Adrian. She was at a great disadvantage. Senior Amelia, her usually immaculate hair, was now messy, and her eyes were bloodshot and bloodshot. She had become even scarier now that she hadn't slept all night. If the beastmen attack again, you can leave. I refuse to believe that you don't have a way to escape. Of course, I can leave whenever I want. You? Don't tell me that you're planning on dying together with the city like a foolish knight. Me? I'm the undying Roland. How could I possibly die here? I'm a super willful witch of the Tempest mood. How could I possibly listen to your commands? Now that my temper has returned, I'm going to go all out against those beastmen. You think I'm useless just because I don't have a pet? I'll show you what a melee mage is like. Looking at it from this angle, Amelia, who had her sleeves rolled up, seemed like a shrewish senior from back in the day. I shook my head. There were some words that I didn't say out loud. Eliza? Heloise's preparations are complete, but she wanted me to tell you something. Don't use that unless it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, all your hard work will be in vain. I still had my final trump card prepared, and right now, the only thing that could turn the tables in such a hopeless situation was the ultimate forbidden spell of undead magic, undead calamity. However, as long as I used this ultimate forbidden spell, which was forbidden by every country in the continent. All the corpses in the area would transform into mindless, low-level undead. This was completely different from when I summoned the undead back in the day. Back then, the undead that responded to my summons were the undead who were unwilling to remain silent, while the ones controlled by undead calamity were the mindless undead who were permanently bloodthirsty. This was a forceful and permanent enslavement, as well as a blasphemy against the corpses of the warriors. Perhaps the warriors by my side would immediately turn their weapons against me, an evil undead mage. If I used undead calamity, the saying that undead don't represent evil would instantly become useless. It was likely that the Mist Alliance's plan would be completely ruined, and the Donglan Principality would likely be viewed as a new axis of evil, which would cause them to be isolated from the outside world. At that time, we would be the ones to win the war and lose all the benefits. Anything is better than being completely destroyed. It'll be hopeless if this little bit of flesh and blood is destroyed. However, Eliza adjusted her eyeglasses upon hearing my words. She didn't say anything, but judging from her lowered eyelids, she seemed rather displeased and listless. "What's the matter? Why didn't you ask me if I could escape? Why didn't you try to persuade me to escape?" "All right, then." Eliza indignantly spat out her resentment. She was quite cute when she was angry. Of course, she didn't want to escape by herself. She was just unhappy that she didn't receive the care that she deserved. At the very least, in name, Roland was still Eliza's boyfriend. I shook my head. Based on my understanding of Eliza, she didn't need to say such useless things to begin with. "What's there to ask? Didn't you say that you would always follow me, no matter if it was in the river Styx or hell? What, are you going back on your word?" Right after I said that, the dark clouds transformed into a clear sky. She smiled very sweetly. "No way. I'll never regret it. Then let's fight to the death together. I'll go find you in the river Styx." Such a strange conversation didn't seem logical at all, but it was highly likely that it was going to happen. Perhaps the love lives of undying individuals were just so strange. I secretly broke into a cold sweat as I watched the gloomy sky turn bright again. I glanced at Amelia, who had suddenly become displeased, and felt Elisa's gaze on my back. I suddenly realized that my luck was finally turning for the better. Did I really say something like I was a winner in life? But why is it that every time I'm about to die, I'll suddenly turn for the better? Am I the type of unlucky person who's destined to shout after this battle, "I'll go home and get married," or after I leave the battlefield, "I'll say goodbye to XX before I die"? Hey, I don't want to die in my own funeral. That's why beautiful women are tearing up and confessing to me, "Actually, I like you." However, the familiar sound of footsteps not far away interrupted my thoughts. The final battle had finally arrived. Surprisingly, the person leading the group wasn't a beast man, but rather a familiar figure. His slender figure and light footsteps could only belong to an elf. Atrian. That's right. Even though he had transformed into a gray-blood elf, even though time had left its mark on his body, I would never forget his familiar face. After all, the person who had dealt me a fatal blow back in the day was this arrogant elven racist. But right now, this disciple of mine didn't seem to be in a good state. Two axe-wielding beastmen were dragging him forward, constantly nagging as if they wanted to do something. Persuade him to surrender? Is there any point in saying such things at a time like this? Atrian's guesses seemed reasonable, but there would only be one ruler in the Northlands. Since there was already a deep grudge, the only way to cleanse it would be with the blood of the enemy. Persuading him to surrender would be impossible from the very start. However, judging from how Atrian's mouth was slowly moving, I was astonished. "Hurry, kill him." Pitch-black divine light had already descended from the sky. That forbidden ritual had directly entered its final phase. The beastmen were saying, "Prove your worth, elf." Only two words came out of Adrian's mouth. God's Descent. Chapter 192. What were gods? There was actually no way to answer this question. After all, in this colorful world, there were far too many existences with the title of God. Not only that, they had truly reached the level of God in everyone's hearts, but in reality, they couldn't be considered the same. Elemental gods, true gods of order, evil gods of chaos, primordial gods, and so on. They were all completely different in terms of composition, abilities, nature, and so on. Nobody could give a complete definition of them. Even the demon lords in the chaos abyss could call themselves gods and recruit believers to bestow divine arts upon them. In reality, there were quite a few devils and demons who did this. Their believers usually hid in the shadows, and those dangerous devil worshippers were often on various wanted lists. However, the Order gods, as the victors of the last holy war, actually had the most complete information. As for Rose, she was exiled from the Order faction. From a certain standpoint, she was quite similar to an ordinary Order true god. She had her own divine kingdom and oracle, and she would even protect the Dark Elves. In order to understand these undying existences, one had to first understand the difference between the Order true gods and other gods. The Order true gods were usually directly connected to a certain divine concept, and their existence represented the concept itself. First of all, one shouldn't treat the gods as individual entities. While they were indeed high above and eternally immortal, they were still subject to many restrictions. They created their own divine domains, but their true bodies were also trapped within their divine domains. They merged with their divine concepts and concepts to become incredibly powerful, but they were also merged with concepts and lost their sense of self. The Order faction was still the Order faction. Their god system was like a large tree with lush branches and leaves. All the gods were a part of the tree, and each divine concept and god had various kinds of connections. Low god, middle god, high god, main god. This was only an extremely rough classification, but from a certain standpoint, this was the current situation of the world tree. If the main gods were the top of the god system, then the powerful gods were their branches that continued downwards, and the countless souls and power of belief were the nourishment for the world tree. In a way, Rose was still the same elven god of order from back then. She wanted to create her own world tree and make herself a true elven main god. Her first step was to rebuild the dark elven divine system, and the god of poison, Felix, was obviously the first. And when they became a part of the world tree and lost part of themselves, from a certain point of view, these true gods should not be treated as individual beings. The closest existence to their current situation was the collective concept of a country. One god and one divine kingdom. They were a combination of concepts and collective interests. While they obtained the authority of system administrators, they were also tightly bound by the responsibilities of administrators. Leave his own divine kingdom? That was a great taboo, and as long as they did not leave the divine kingdom, it was impossible for the gods to truly die. If the incarnation they sent out was killed, it would only be a loss of divine power. In the modern world, where the elemental tide wasn't very active, there was a limit to the strength of an incarnation. A semi-god incarnation might be able to deal with most situations, but against a veteran semi-god who had experienced hundreds of battles, the incarnation would often become a test subject for the other party to research divine power. In order to allow their guardian deities to be truly useful, the ancient elf empire had once led the world in this area. God's descent. Using a special body, the true god would adjust his or her own soul wavelength to match the true god's soul wavelengths. Then, the true god would give up control over his or her physical body, allowing the true gods to perfectly merge into his or her physical body, allowing the true gods to be incredibly powerful. If the true god's descent was successful, the true gods would perfectly descend. Will was power, and the soul was power. If the true god's descent was more than 90% complete, then in this state where the soul and body were one, the true god's descent would be far more powerful than his or her incarnation. His or her combat strength will be close to that of the true god's main body. It should be mentioned that God's descent was a double-edged sword. The soul was the other side of power. It was the pure embodiment of will and power. If the true god's descent died, it was highly likely that the true god's divine power would be greatly damaged. And if the true god himself was only a low god, it was highly likely that the true god would directly die. Clairlan, the forest guardian deity, was indeed incredibly powerful when he or she descended on his semi-god level descendant. In fact, he or she even forced Rose to descend on her true body. But it was precisely because of this that Clairlatin's descent died in battle that Clairlatin himself fell. The requirements for a god's descent were incredibly strict, especially the requirements for the true god's descent. It was only natural that the true god's descent would be as close to the true god as possible. It would be even better if the true god's bloodline and soul wavelengths were similar. From a certain standpoint, Cavendish's descent was the Chaos Abyss's version of a god's descent. At the very least, the principles were quite similar. However, there were professionals in this area. The human witches of the far west, the soul shamans of the beastmen, and the moon elf priests of the elves all had god's descent physiques known as spiritual bodies. And the moon elves had a long history in this area. Moon elves had been an important role in the elf empire since ancient times. Throughout the elf empire's long history, all the high priests had been moon elves. Their natural spiritual bodies made it incredibly easy for moon elves to communicate with the true gods, and borrowing divine power to use super divine arts was a natural talent of their species. And when Adrian joined Rose's side, the Spider Queen unhesitatingly chose him as her future descendant. Amelia's many setbacks were due to this natural poison imbued with divine power, which greatly countered her. God's descent, as Adrian muttered, a pitch-black light descended, and a mysterious black fog began to wrap around Adrian's body. Strange magical runes appeared on every part of his skin. Adrian knelt on the ground in pain, but all the spears and arrows thrown at him by the humans were blocked. Poison god Felix. It didn't take much thought to know that the corroded ground around Felix was a clear indication of his identity. He was the lucky one who had recently ascended to the divine throne. The dark elf god Felix had long since reached the peak of semi-god rank. With Rose's help, he had stolen the forest guardian god's divine concept. His original divine concept of forest sower and guardian god had mutated, and, combined with the poison assassin Felix's own special abilities, he had become the poison of nature divine concept. And I didn't even need my own eyes to see who this opponent was. That was because at such a critical moment, my system wouldn't be willing to remain silent. Epic quest. Slay a god. Quest hint. Kill the poison god Felix, and let the foolish Rose taste the pain of losing her son again. Let her know what happens to those who go with the flow. Reward. Based on your contributions, it will be worth at least 50,000 fate points. Punishment for failure. Trust me, if you fail, there's no need for punishment. He's just a super weak god. You can't possibly fail, can you? Slay a god? You really think highly of me. Even if he's a super weak god who just became a true god, I wouldn't have any confidence in killing him. The Adrian before me was no longer in human form. The power of a true god was beginning to change his form. With a series of distortions, the boundary between reality and illusion was broken, and a gigantic black spider walked towards reality. He was even more evil than the devil lords of my nightmares, and even more majestic than dragons. Right now, that gigantic black spider's 8 eyes were glowing with greed. The digestive juices in its disgusting giant mouth had already melted the ground in front of it, and the venom in its tail was constantly seeping out. The poison only reached the tips of its feet, and the venom between its legs was enough to transform the ground into a poisonous swamp. Its divine power gave it extraordinary supernatural abilities. Just looking down at it would cause others to despair. Just looking at it would cause the weak-willed to fall into despair and madness. But fight it to the death. We have nowhere to retreat to. At least don't die like a girl. That's right. There was no need for me to waste my breath or forcefully lead the way. We had nowhere to retreat to. Tui, Rose, I'm going to properly deal with you for this. I spat out a mouthful of blood as I once again raised my Roland's sacred sword and led the charge. I was prepared to complete this myth-ranked quest that belonged to me. With a god's descending body as the opponent, the battle was in dire straits. The huge spiders were so agile that they moved like precision machine tools, easily tearing apart the fortifications of the defensive line. Under the King of Poison's control, black mist surrounded its limbs. Magic spells and arrows were instantly destroyed before they could even come into contact with it. The most troublesome part was still that terrifying poisonous mist. Anyone who came into contact with it would instantly die. Those who didn't even get up yet would die. I've determined the divine power's attribute. It's not just pure poison, but also conceptual corrosion and withering. He's causing life to deform in advance. Absolutely don't touch it. The moment Heloise finished speaking, Felix's giant eyes locked onto her, and he spat out a mouthful of purplish-black venom. Felix wasn't a brainless beast. His senses were far superior. Even though he only had the appearance of a black cat, he was able to point out my divine domain and nature, which made me his #1 enemy. While the battle was in full swing, the orc chieftains were watching coldly from the high platform of a tower not far away. Don't we need to send troops to help? Isn't that our ally? A pig tribe leader seemed to be rather puzzled. Weren't they supposed to be the main characters of the battle? Why were they watching their ally go into battle while watching from back? This wasn't the beastman's usual style. Help? Heh. If that spider really doesn't turn around and kill us after wiping out the humans, I'll have to thank the god of war for protecting me. Ally? He clearly has such great combat strength, yet he's watching us suffer heavy losses after a night of bloody battle, and now he's jumping out to help? If this isn't stealing the spoils of war, then what is? Beastmen simply preferred using their fists rather than their brains, and they weren't idiots. How could they not see through Rose's scheming? Almont spread out his single arm, and the slowly falling snowflakes landed on his palm. As they accumulated, they were melted into snow water by the warmth of his palm. Asterisk crack. Asterisk Almont clenched his fist tightly, and a vicious glint appeared in his widened eyes. At this moment, he was undoubtedly the Beastman King. Prepare for battle, and finish organizing the troops before the snow falls. In this battle, no one, no race, is worthy of trust. Brave warriors, prepare to fight to the death for honor and our ancestral land. Even if we're destined to be buried here, we'll let this cruel world understand the backbone of us beastmen. Suddenly, an age horn sounded from afar. That was a summon from a true ally. They're finally here. All the tribe leaders revealed delighted expressions. At this moment, I had just received a scout's report, but I suddenly froze. How can there be more beastmen? Didn't they already send out their main forces? But from the direction of the incoming army, as well as the tribe's battle flag, I instantly understood. Beastmen of the plains? That damned Onderoken. Since the beastmen of the plateau region were capable of using earth elemental tunnels to reach human territory, then why couldn't the beastmen of the plains region do the same? Perhaps this was Onderoken's final trump card. But right now, there was nothing I could do. I thought that the venomous spider in front of me was already difficult enough to deal with. Heloise, prepare yourself. If we must die here, at least drag these bastards down with us. Suddenly, another battle drum sounded, and that familiar elven chant actually caused the huge spider to reveal a human-like expression of delight. As for me, after carefully listening to it, I also smiled. Finally, it's time. Chapter 193. Iron Bloodline, Bronze Body, Silver Dignity, and Gold Will. These were the divisions that humans came up with. Every rank was actually the result of countless hardships, blood, and tears. The silver and gold species didn't need to make such divisions at all, because they were born above the so-called silver and gold species. In their eyes, dividing power levels so low was no different from dividing ranks for their own children. It was completely unnecessary. For humans, however, each rank represented the fundamental evolution of a warrior. Iron Bloodline, Bronze Body. These names explained everything. At this rank, human mages would construct mana circuits within their bodies, while warriors would discover the potential of their physical bodies. Bronze Body also meant perfect body. This didn't mean that the physical body was also perfect. Rather, at this rank, ordinary people would no longer be able to discover new power from their own physical bodies. In that case, what exactly was Silver Dignity? This was something that was worth discussing. After all, it was completely different from other ranks. Things like dignity were completely incomprehensible. Incomprehensible? At this rank, humans can finally maintain their dignity in front of other species. Only at this rank can we be considered to be on the same level, and only then will it be possible to be compared. If you only look at power level, there isn't even a fundamental difference between silver and bronze. However, there are some things that can be sensed only at that rank. Silver and bronze, the peak of mortals and the beginning of inhumans, may not seem to have much of difference, but it's actually the difference between heaven and earth. These descriptions were actually quite vague, but for true silver powerhouses, they were as natural as breathing and eating. This was like asking a person how to breathe, how to use their strength, and what tricks they had. Perhaps even if everyone knew how to breathe, they wouldn't be able to explain it. Now that I've reached the silver rank, I finally don't have to worry about being mysteriously killed. For silver powerhouses, life force and mental strength were both solid foundational powers. They could create a warrior's key, a mage's magic ring, which formed an invisible barrier. Their effects were different, but at the very least, they could all defend against external attacks. Silver powerhouses were able to form their own personal domains within their physical bodies, which could defend against unnatural powers. At least I know how I died. At least I can be cannon fodder. At least I can die with some dignity. On a real battlefield, those who aren't silver tier aren't even qualified to be cannon fodder. Under the great magic and profound swordsmanship of a legend, in the soul world of the saint, they are as defenseless as rocks, trees, and other inanimate objects. One thought and one look can kill them on the spot. There's no chance of survival. How can they win? In that era where many races fought each other, a young silver who was regarded as a genius by his own clansmen had a face full of helplessness and self-mockery. And if the opponent is a god, even if it's just a weak god who has just ascended to godhood, I shouted and gathered my will to form an invisible barrier that isolated the purple-gray, withering god domain. If I still can't reach the silver rank, I'm afraid that I won't even be able to see my enemies before I die mysteriously in front of all the divine domains. And when I learned that I was about to face a god-level opponent like Cavendish, I unhesitatingly used up all my fate points in order to deal with an opponent with a divine domain. At the very least, I couldn't die mysteriously. And now, Cavendish had left. Felix doubtlessly also possessed a true divine domain. From the moment that he descended, his formless yet tangible divine domain had already covered half the city. If anyone used prophecy or detection abilities, they would see that purple-gray smoke everywhere. This wasn't something that Felix had done intentionally. It was a side effect of his divine domain. However, this side effect was fatal to the weak. Cough, cough. The injured people behind me couldn't help but cough up large mouthfuls of blood. That black, filthy blood was only a symptom of their worsening injuries. Mom, I feel so bad. I can't breathe. In a shelter, a yellow-faced girl with dark blue lips begged her mother for help. She wasn't the first to be unable to endure it. Currently, most of the commoners in the shelter were coughing. Those who were sick suddenly got sick, and those who weren't sick suddenly got sick. Infectious diseases began to spread. The withering god domain and the poison god domain were leading them towards death. This was also one of the reasons why true gods were forbidden from descending. True gods, who were the incarnations of certain concepts, were far too frightening. If they existed in the mortal plane, they would naturally distort everything around them. For example, when the god of storm descended, his sky-covering waves would destroy everything. When the sun god descended, his frighteningly high heat would transform the mortal plane into hell. Even the god of law's divine domain would likely create a strange domain where anyone who committed a crime would be punished. Felix was a half-spider, half-elf god of poison. His new divine domain included nature's end, withering poison. In his divine domain, all natural creatures would be affected by his divine domain. Even the god of law's divine domain would likely create a strange domain where anyone who committed a crime would be sentenced to death. This wasn't the destruction of their own will, but the destruction they brought to the world was unavoidable. That was why no matter if it was the Order gods or the evil gods of chaos, they would do their best to avoid having their god domain or their true bodies descend. But since Rose's true body had descended, the unspoken rules had long since been broken. In that case, it wouldn't matter if her subordinate Felix violated the rules again. If we don't expel him as soon as possible, we'll all die. Perhaps this new poison god would be punished by the gods in the future, but if we didn't eliminate the god-level existence before us in time, we wouldn't be able to see the future. The only fortunate part was that the gigantic spider god before us wasn't able to control his divine domain very well. His divine domain naturally spread out, but its effects were actually weakened. It wouldn't be able to pose an immediate threat to the warriors who actually faced it. Those who aren't at the silver rank retreat. Take the commoners and retreat as far away from his divine domain as possible. The overall evaluation doesn't count. It has to be the power level of your true body. Even powerful individuals at the silver rank would only be cannon fodder for a few seconds. Just being stared at by this gigantic spider would cause many to vomit blood and die. What surprised even me was that I was in an unexpectedly good condition. It was as if the divine domain didn't have any impression of me at all. This was probably something that even legend rank individuals wouldn't be able to do. The small world created by my physical body was actually able to completely block out the divine domain's influence. This definitely wasn't some simple coincidence. Instead, it was a special ability of my bloodline that specifically targeted me. Host's willpower has exceeded 20, and you've reached the silver rank. You've also been suppressed by the divine domain. All conditions have been met. Congratulations to Host for awakening the racial talent. Chaos Barrier. Chaos Barrier. Protect your own existence from the divine domain and soul world's pressure. Reduce the effectiveness of will type and illusory abilities. Although the explanation was rather simple and vague, it was doubtlessly the most practical ability I had right now. At the very least, with its help, I would be able to calmly observe the overall situation and make arrangements and commands. What? Go up and fight me? Right now, I probably wouldn't even be able to harm him if I didn't use my forbidden techniques. That would be no different from suicide. Borealis, cover him with your cannons. In the endless snowy night of tug-of-war, the Borealis, which had lost its vision, was completely useless. However, it still had sufficient ammunition and energy reserves. Under my command, the eager envy immediately opened fire on all of its cannons. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, asterisk boom. Asterisk, countless explosions exploded on Felix's body like fireworks. The mage tower's lightning and explosive flames never stopped, and the sound of explosions kept echoing. The battle was quite spectacular. Unfortunately, in front of the astonishing defensive power of a true god's descended body, this product of mortal engineering couldn't even break through its defenses. But it's enough. It's more than enough as cover. Senior Amelia. With a shout, the green-haired witch transformed into a shooting star that shot upwards. When she suddenly began to fall down, she had an aura even more terrifying than a real meteor. For the gigantic Felix, that was nothing more than a meatball the size of a grain of rice. He didn't need to pay attention to it at all. However, Amelia's sudden heavy punch caused the gigantic beast to scream pitifully and stagger. Judging from the dark green venom that sprayed out from the wound, this punch had pierced through its internal organs. Amelia used her strength to prove that the older, the wiser. Even if her abilities were naturally countered, as a veteran semi-god, she still had the ability to fight. The elite warriors of the allied army had already rushed to Spider's side, but they suddenly stopped. There's mucus on the ground. Also, be careful of invisible nets. Those were his final words. Felix, who had suffered such a heavy blow, furiously activated his divine domain at full power. A grayish-black, poisonous mist spread, and the warriors not far from him were the first to suffer. Strange tumors suddenly spread throughout their bodies, and they collapsed with their eyes wide open in anger. Seeing how pitiful those warriors were, the ones following behind hesitated. At this point, It wasn't that they were afraid of sacrifice, but that the sacrifice had to be meaningful. Fortunately, a god's interference in the holy war would definitely lead to another god's retaliation. When Felix's god descended, some existences also had a reason to interfere. Our reinforcements finally arrived. A familiar, glorious silver light descended. Womians will have been observing the battlefield this entire time. When the enemy true god disobeyed the rules and acted rashly, he decided that he had to interfere as well. When that light dissipated, an entire army had appeared where they had originally been. The messy battle flags were nostalgic, and their familiar faces caused exclamations of surprise. Lone to Basra, that's the legendary hero Valkyrie. Isn't that General Lolly? She just died on the battlefield 2 days ago. And so did General Basra. How did they come back to life? Idiot, that's Valkyrie. Didn't a true god declare that any warrior who dies in battle for the sake of protecting Valkyrie can become a true Valkyrie? This cruel war caused countless Northland's warriors to fall on this land, but also allowed the newly born Northland's guardian god to open his own temple of Valkyrie. And now, under Basra's leadership, this newly born Valkyrie army returned to the mortal plane. Spears were thrown like lightning, and the sword-wielding Valkyrie was already beginning to slice apart the spiderwebs. They were still maintaining the advantage, and when Felix was forced to continuously retreat, his 8 eyes shone with a vicious light. Then, that death-inducing divine domain arc exploded once more. But this time, the effects were quite poor. The Valkyrie army actually ignored his threat and took the opportunity to launch a new wave of attacks. But just thinking about it for a little longer, it was easy to understand the reason. This could be considered Felix's bad luck. Valkyrie was immortal. He was a condensation of souls and didn't have a physical body of a living creature. Naturally, he wouldn't be mutated or poisoned. This time, Felix had met his natural enemy. At this moment, the most eye-catching person on the battlefield was probably Lone to Basra. Countless weapons suddenly appeared in the air. Precious divine weapons rained down like rain, and magic-patterned scrolls drawn in ancient elven language spread throughout the entire domain. From the very beginning, Basra had been fighting with all his might. In the Battle of the Dragonslayer, through the amplification of great judgment, he had briefly reached the edge of a true god and understood this vast power. Now, the elven god system's divine domain and divine spark were right before his eyes, and the master he was loyal to had made it clear that he wouldn't stop him from advancing. How could he not give it his all? The gigantic spears kept stabbing into Felix's body. The Borealis cannons didn't have any gaps, and the witch's sudden attacks were even more deadly. The god of poison, who was constantly receiving new wounds, found himself forced into a corner. But if that was all, it was impossible for the Valkyrie army to deal with a god. Spider's gray forest. To Felix, the opponent before him was too difficult to deal with. He was forced to use the ability he had just learned. The concepts of nature, elves, corruption, and wither were all mixed together, and the Spider Prince's nightmare became a demon in reality. In the divine territory, countless strange plants suddenly grew. Those deformed plants were ugly and strange, but soon these smelly trees and vegetation matured, directly turning into a dense and strange forest. And in the depths of the pitch-black forest, countless giant magical beasts with 8 legs and compound eyes stepped out of their nightmares into reality. They had already begun to step into the battlefield. It was chaos. It wasn't a one-versus-many battle, but a decisive battle between 2 armies. While the Red Maple defense line was in chaos, on another battlefield not far away, 2 real armies were testing each other out. One side was naturally the Plains beastmen who had come through the tunnel left behind by Omdorokin. And from the very beginning, the Earth Elemental God, who had communicated with a Mont Blood axe, had never thought of completely opening up this secret tunnel and letting the Plains beastmen fight for victory with them. And when the battlefield reached a stalemate, Emont and Omdorokin finally made up their minds and requested for new reinforcements. And the main force on the other side apart from the demons of the underground world, were mostly elves. But Felix's joy was destined to be for naught, because the elves who came were destined not to be their reinforcements. Apart from the Silent Underground Alliance, there were also more than 30,000 new species of elves. Their grayish-black skin was similar to that of the Dark Elves. They had once accepted Rose's power of corruption, but their skin color was slightly lighter. Under the leadership of a Banshee princess, they broke free from Rose's control and stood against the Dark Elves. The Underground Army, which had a mix of gray elves and the distant plains beastmen. The two armies were on guard against each other, but obviously lacked the determination to fight a direct battle. And in the army camp, Swanna's face was filled with worry as she looked at the gigantic spider that was the size of a mountain in the distance. After all, that was her father, the person she had once trusted the most, and the perfect king she respected. The humans, who are naturally weak, are fighting to protect their home. But our elves are still suffering. The army has collectively fallen into the fallen elves, and even the king has turned into a monster. At this point, I'm afraid that it's impossible to turn back. Father, is this the ending you hoped for? Is this the pride of the superior elves that you are so proud of? Chapter 194. The accumulated corrosive divine power began to corrode the entire world. As a true god, Felix had stayed in this plane for far too long. The essence of his divine power was beginning to corrode the laws of the plane, turning this entire space into his divine kingdom. Grayish-purple clouds gathered in the sky, and the new snowflakes were actually inky purple. The violent winds in the sky had a slightly sweet fragrance, but anyone who accidentally smelled it would feel dizzy. With Felix as the center, there were no longer any trees or vegetation. All the plants had withered, and the small animals had either died to the ground or mutated into the most frightening man-eating monsters. The battle between humans and true gods continued. Even when faced with the descent of a true god's incarnation, the defending army still didn't give up. They continued to fill in the gaps, or perhaps it should be said that they were stalling for time and struggling at death's door. This was a battle where there was no hope of victory. Or, to put it more bluntly, this was a one-sided massacre. In this increasingly distorted world, the poison had already seeped into every breath. Every moment, someone would suddenly collapse and die. And the brave warriors fighting against this spider on the front lines were rapidly falling to the venom and sharp claws that contained divine power. If it wasn't for the fact that the Valkyrie army, which didn't fear the venom and didn't care about sacrificing themselves, acted as the main force to restrain the spider, and the warships that were constantly firing cannons from afar gave Felix enough trouble, the battle would probably have already collapsed. But this definitely wasn't a solution. The powerful fighters that the northern countries had painstakingly nurtured fell without a single exchange. Even though the Valkyrie army was the main force, many of them were sent back to Wumian's Valkyrie Palace. Is this the power of a god? It's truly despairing. If such an existence appeared in the Ottoman Empire, on a high platform far away from the battlefield, the worried hermit could only shake his head helplessly as he put down his binoculars. At first, the Ottoman Empire had sent him and a squadron of White Wolf Guards as a volunteer army to provide support. Originally, they were only there to transport supplies and gather information about the North. Dasos's ambition had never been extinguished. But nobody expected that the Beastmen's ambush, which seemed to happen every few days in history, would turn into such a cruel battlefield. Is this the Holy War? Everyone's eyes were completely bloodshot. Legendary heroes and true gods that were rarely seen in the past had appeared, and the silver and gold fighters that the various countries viewed as treasures were actually nothing more than pawns on the battlefield. Oh, another dozen have fallen. It'll take us at least 10 years to train a silver fighter that doesn't rely on equipment. Hemet's sigh came from the bottom of his heart. The fact that the war had escalated to such an extent had undoubtedly exceeded everyone's expectations. Up until now, in order to fight for the benefits and living space of their race, the Northerners, Elves, and Beastmen had all entered the battlefield. All the Northerners had given their all. In a short span of 2 months, The number of undying existences that have fallen was not small, let alone the elemental gods. Even a true god had fallen. Just the ascension of a new god would be a huge news that would shock the entire world. Apart from the war on the surface, the elemental gods and the residents of the underground world were also secretly participating in the war. Countless weapons of war were bound to change this generation. Now, even the true gods disregarded their reputation and directly participated in the war. Perhaps nobody would dare to say that the war in the north was petty anymore. If the Holy War is a battlefield of such intensity, I'm afraid that even the super empires won't be able to hold on for long. Looks like I'll have to discuss this with His Majesty and the Empress when I return. Heh, I'll have to be lucky enough to survive this calamity first. Shaking his head, he dispelled the unnecessary thoughts. Then, he handed a magic crystal with sufficient information to the Griffin Knight who had been waiting for a long time. Give this to His Majesty Dasos. Then what about you? You don't intend to leave? It's better that you leave with me. The Griffin Knight's doubts weren't unfounded. If Red Maple City fell, the Beastmen and the Poison God wouldn't let Hermit off just because he was an Ottoman. But now Hermit shook his head. I intend to see this war to the end. It's worth exchanging my life for first-hand information. And I still don't think that the humans will lose. The Griffin Knight soared through the sky and flew towards the south. When a feather fell from the sky and landed on Hermit's hand, he heard slightly heavy footsteps behind him. As for Hermit, he already knew who it was that had arrived. You want to fight? You've seen it for yourself. In a battle of this level, you're just cannon fodder. There was only silence behind him. There was no reply. But it showed the determination of the White Wolf Knight. Even if they were only a guest army, they were unwilling to watch their own kind die in battle and the civilians be slaughtered without doing anything. As a knight, they were unwilling to do anything. Only cannon fodder? They weren't newbies who had just entered the battlefield. How could they not know the difference in strength? But even if they knew that there were thorns in front of them, the knight's face was still filled with determination. Their eyes were firm, and their arms were firmly gripping their weapons. Since the beginning of the war, their fighting spirit had been burning, and their blood was boiling. The knight fights for justice. They swear to sacrifice their blood to fight against injustice and evil. The knight fights for protection. They treat the weak kindly, but when the butcher's knife is aimed at the innocent, the weak, the sick, and the disabled, they will become the strongest barrier of flesh and blood. The knight fights for royal power. They protect their homeland and are loyal to their liege. But righteousness is their true code of conduct. If there is a conflict between the two, they will listen to their own hearts and make a choice. At that moment, the ancient spirit of the knight didn't seem to be outdated. There was a silent silence. It was these knights who were loyal to the king who made their own choice. Hermit shook his head as if he already knew that this would be the result. It seems that I've said unnecessary words. Letting you retreat will only bring shame to the White Wolf Knight and make the Ottoman Empire be looked down upon by these small border countries. Go perform well. Don't let the Northerners look down on us Ottoman people and the White Wolf Knight of the Ottoman Empire. White Wolf! Victory! That was the White Wolf Knight's angry roar. After this short but resounding battle cry, the knight who didn't intend to turn back left, and the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. Hermit shook his head and focused his attention on the battle. A knight had a knight's duty, and a military advisor had a military advisor's task. Right now, the most important thing for Roland was to collect enough information on the battlefield. At this time, some information was so valuable that he could exchange his life for it. Every moment was precious, and he couldn't afford to relax for even a moment. But what he saw next through the binoculars was rather confusing. That Roland, why did he stop? What are they hiding from? Corodian, a tiger man, was the temporary tribal leader elected by the Beastmen of the Plains. He was also the one who called for this joint operation. Corodian was famous in the Northlands. In a way, he was also an old acquaintance of Renee's. He had been among the Beastmen who had been defeated by Roland. In the entire Beastman society, Corodian was famous for being a radical. Every year during the tribal leaders' conference, he could be heard shouting, "We're going to sweep through Donglan and attack all the way to San Antonio." But right now, Karodian, who had always been decisive, had an expression of hesitation. He even faintly seemed to be regretting his decision. Fighting against the elves here, for no reason? It's meaningless no matter how I think about it. War was an extension of politics. Nobody would want to fight a war without benefits. Naturally, what Amont had promised the beastmen of the plains was to allow both sides to simultaneously fight against the humans and divide up the other's territory. Of course, even if the beastmen won in the end, how much they would get would depend on the difference in power between the beastmen and the humans. Right now, wasting precious resources on a random enemy in a random location wasn't worth it at all. That's a bird? A dragon knight? No, that's Superman. Oh no, that's just a naked, muscular man who's only wearing his underwear on the outside. Ugh, so disgusting. Soon, Karodian didn't need to hesitate any longer. A gigantic shadow descended from the sky and landed right in between the two armies. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Karodian suddenly stabbed himself into the ground and instantly made a pose like he was contemplating something. When everyone looked at him, he suddenly raised his arms, bent his elbows, and punched the air. He made a pose that showed off his muscles by flexing his biceps. Then he smiled. Love and peace. Please stop. This world is so beautiful. We don't need to fight. Make love and no war. We need to love each other and not fight. Karodian's pearly white teeth were reflecting the light. He smiled brightly and spoke louder and louder. By the end, he was actually singing. What made people feel uncomfortable was that he was clearly a muscular monster, but he had a handsome face that was so beautiful that it could be found in a shoujo manga. His face was also filled with bashfulness. Such a sharp contrast made him seem even more incongruous. Kill that pervert for me. All right then. Karodian unhesitatingly shouted out what everyone else was thinking. His subordinates executed his order as fast as they could. Not only were the beastmen impulsive, even Anin Swana had the urge to order people to shoot arrows at Karodian. But unfortunately, all the arrows fell to the ground before they could even reach Karodian, as if there was an invisible barrier around him. Oh my, you're such a naughty child. In that case, allow me, Omar, to teach you what love is. Karodian flexed his latissimus dorsi, biceps, and triceps. Karodian's body and mind were glowing as he performed all these beautiful poses that would make anyone want to vomit. The next instant, an innumerable undead army appeared out of thin air. My heart is filled with my people. As the king, my foothold is our country. I love my undead, and they love me. This is my ultimate love. Karodian threw an extravagant flying kiss at the skeletons as he kept winking at them. The brainless skeletons that he controlled actually made a shy pose together, while the pitiful, intelligent undead, for the first time, and learned that even undead could be disgusted to the point of vomiting on the ground. However, power was the best way to pass the test. Even though Karodian was obviously a pervert, the dense undead army caused the excited beastmen to retreat. Are you Lord Omar? Bones! Roland probably can't hold on for much longer. Please hurry and help him. Oh, so you're the red-haired little N? Little Lionheart told me about you before. You're just like in the information. You're really cute. Do you want to debut together with me and become an idol star? I've recently made up many new beautiful dance moves and songs. If we become a dance group, we'll definitely shock the entire world. Shock the entire world. All right then. At least Anya knew that Karodian was a big shot. At the very least, she kept her complaints and complaints to a whisper. Why is it even more ridiculous than what I've heard? I've never heard of such problems, but the next moment, Omar's reply allowed everyone to understand. Relax. Father has already sent reinforcements. He's such an interesting person. I've learned so much about his understanding of love. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. As the black dot in the distance grew larger and larger, I sensed the truth. My eyebrows kept twitching. Of course, having reinforcements was a good thing, but if the reinforcements were that, I felt that it would be better to fight alone. That's a bird? A dragon knight? No, that's Superman. Oh no, that's a bayphone. I'll hurry and dodge. In my field of vision, the black dot grew larger and larger. Then, it suddenly crashed into the ground, destroying a small building and creating an empty space. What's the matter? Is he dead? The exclamations from the side were obviously from outsiders who weren't familiar with Corodian. After all, no, even if the world of Aichi is destroyed, that guy won't die. How could anyone who was familiar with Corodian not know about his undying gentleman body? Almost died. As expected, the next moment, Corodian poked his head out from the rubble. He had an expression of being lucky to have survived, but I knew that he only had himself to blame. Bastard Draken, the next time you casually tear off my scales and touch everything, I'll throw you into a volcano. Above the clouds, there was an angry roar. That was a thunderstorm. Next, a purple magic dragon descended from the clouds. After landing, it transformed into human form and glared fiercely at the legend-ranked hunter who was trying his best to avoid talking about something else. Thunder Dragon? Is that your animal companion? I heard that Bayphone used his dragon's bloodline to form an alliance with a Thunder Dragon. Only a Thunder Dragon, which was famed for its speed, even among dragons, will be able to bring Bayphone here from Antoon in a single night. It would be nice if you could come, but it would be useless even if you came. Why don't you have Adam come here? I wasn't underestimating him. His opponent was the poison god Felix. A legend-ranked hunter and a young dragon wouldn't be able to make much difference in terms of power. It would be better to have that dragon bring Adam here. But then, I heard a familiar silly chuckle. Haha, I didn't expect you to trust me so much. I looked behind me. Wasn't that the perfect meat shield, Adam? He was currently completely naked and covered in all sorts of magic runes. As it turned out, the moment the Thunder Dragon landed, it unfurled a gigantic magic carpet on its back. All sorts of magic runes and magic arrays had already been drawn on it. When this simple magic array resonated with Antoon's magic array, Marguerite was able to use the remaining magic materials to teleport again. The target of the teleportation was naturally the currently smiling Adam. Wonderful! I laughed in delight as I kicked Adam away. Be my meat shield. I need around 15 minutes of absolute safety. All right then, let's not talk about how that naked man walked onto the battlefield with a displeased expression. With a top-level meat shield here, the pressure on the other warriors was greatly reduced, and I now had a chance to do something. Heloise had only pointed out Felix's stats, and he had already treated me with great importance. It was likely that there was nothing in the divine domain that could escape Felix's attention. Without his protection, I wouldn't be able to do anything great. Now that I had a meat shield, I could finally use my trump card. Chant the forbidden spell, Ice Aeon. First of all, that would definitely be a major spell that couldn't be completed in an hour or two. And first of all, I wouldn't be able to cast such a forbidden spell even if I burned my life force. Not to mention the severe consequences of casting such a forbidden spell, I felt that even a large-scale forbidden spell probably wouldn't be able to kill him. Also, I felt that the moment I started chanting the incantation, the earth-shaking magical waves would be like begging Felix to kill me at all costs. In the past, I had the protection of an undead army, but now I didn't have that ability. If my opponent was an endless horde of beastmen, I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. But if my opponent was a true god, then I really did have a trump card that wasn't really a trump card. It was a trump card that would definitely break the rules and bring me endless trouble. But it was also a trump card that I had specially prepared for such situations. And it was because of this trump card that I dared to face Cavendish by myself. After all, so many years had passed, and it was entirely possible that Cavendish would turn on me. If I didn't have the ability to protect myself, how could I possibly appear in front of him? And it was precisely because of Cavendish's easygoing attitude that I had kept this trump card until now. And now, since Felix had completely broken the rules, I naturally didn't have to worry about attracting trouble with my trump card that was above all the rules. And just as I expected, the moment I started preparing to cast the spell, a rain of venom shot towards me. I didn't even look at it as I focused on my preparations. After all, I trusted that someone would block this trouble for me. Oh, my underwear. It's over. I'm so embarrassed. As expected, Adam blocked the venom for me. However, the corrosive poison gas attack caused his remaining piece of clothing to be destroyed, leaving him completely naked. Pause. Wait for me to change my pants. Hey, I already said pause. Why aren't you following the rules? Lady, can I borrow your skirt for a moment? Hey, don't run. I'm really not a pervert. I just saw that you weren't wearing much, so it seemed more convenient for you to take it off. Pervert. All right then, let's ignore the fact that he had actually tried to borrow a female mage's robe, only to be slapped in the face instead. Still, the fact that he was here gave me enough time to be safe. And so I made up my mind and used this trump card. God's Descent. Chapter 195. The battle before us had fallen into a hopeless predicament. Even if the warriors weren't afraid of sacrificing themselves, if Felix was so impenetrable that it was difficult to even break through his defenses, this was naturally an unwinnable battle. Naturally, everyone became discouraged. All below the true god level are ants. Elfmane god Anslo Schusta Delban. Even though I never agreed with such arrogant words, I had to admit that the most troublesome aspects of undying existences like gods were their undying nature and vast divine domains. This was a clear example. No matter how hard any mortal tried, they would be unable to deal any truly life-threatening damage to Felix. Even if they did manage to do something, Felix would recover in the next second after expending some of his power. What ants? It's just that the quality of divine power is too high. Mortals are unable to deal any life-threatening damage. Still, it's not like there's no other way. God's Descent. That's right, my method was God's Descent. This was the trump card I had left behind when I ascended to become a god, as well as my trump card to deal with those old fellows who might come looking for trouble with me. True gods were undefeatable. Even though this was considered the natural law of the world, I had never believed it to be so. However, divine power was a unique type of power that was almost a concept, and it was indeed difficult to deal with. And in order to achieve my goal in this holy war, I would have to deal with true gods sooner or later. And the simplest way to deal with them would be to have divine power as well. This was also the foundational reason why I spent so much effort to create a true god that I could trust. The conditions for God's Descent? In terms of souls and physical compatibility, Woomians and I were second to none. We were the same person to begin with, so all the rituals could be skipped. If the Moon Elves were able to reach a compatibility rate of over 60% to complete their God's Descent, Cavendish would have a compatibility rate of over 80% with Renee, which meant that Woomians and I would have a compatibility rate of 100% from the very start. The Moon Elves would need to change their soul wavelengths in order to complete their God's Descent ritual. But for me, I only needed to form a connection with my clone in the sky. Of course, having too high a compatibility rate wasn't necessarily a good thing. Having identical souls would cause another problem, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. As the two wills and souls of the same origin drew closer to each other through the link, a silver light so vast that it was impossible to look at it directly descended. A silver scale appeared in midair, and the Nephilic judge's silver mask materialized. The silver celestial domain and the grayish-purple celestial domain directly collided. Through my physical body, the guardian god of law and the Northlands, Woomians, has descended. Is this the feeling of a god? Everything in the surroundings was crystal clear. Even the distant hermit, who was so scared that he dropped his binoculars, had a vivid expression. And in the eyes of a god, all illusions were meaningless. The truth of the soul could be seen clearly. I could sense the endless power of faith flowing through the heavens pillar to the various divine domains. In the Northlands, most of the power of faith was connected to me. As the guardian god of the Northlands, countless believers made me stronger. It's not a good thing to be powerful right now. I don't have much time left, so I need to hurry up. A physical body could only have one soul. When two souls entered the same physical body, even if there were special methods to make it so that only one soul could be used, the moment they descended for too long, they would instinctively try to devour and oppress each other. However, this wasn't a problem for me. Woomians was a clone that had no sense of self to begin with. The fusion of two completely identical souls was like two files with identical data stacked on top of each other. No matter how they were stacked, they were still the same file. But my problem was not in this aspect. Damn it, the fusion has begun as expected. That's right, my problem wasn't how to perform a perfect God's descent, but rather how to separate after the God's descent. If an ordinary God's descent was the equivalent of mixing water and oil, then they would work hard on how to fuse two completely different existences into one in order to increase the fusion rate. My God's descent was the equivalent of mixing water and water. The biggest problem was that it would be difficult to separate after the fusion. But right now, I had already achieved my first strategic goal. Countless secrets and knowledge were pouring into my mind, and a tremendous amount of divine power was pouring into my body. Although I had taken many detours, I had finally stolen the knowledge and wisdom of a true God. The secrets of divinity, the composition of the power of faith, the cycle of reincarnation, the Valkyrie Palace. It's all worth it. There are some things that could only be seen clearly after reaching a certain height. I have been looking forward to the mysteries of the gods for a long time. Only with this would it be possible for the next step of my plan to be realized, and my future path of development would also become clearer. I've finally taken another step forward. With these, I'll be able to fully increase my personal combat strength, but now wasn't the time to be happy. My was already beginning to become hazy. Womian's, who was a vast ocean, was currently fusing with me, who was a small stream. If this fusion continued, we would likely never be able to separate. No matter if Womian's is pulled down or I'm pulled up, neither is an acceptable ending. This means that all of my efforts for so long will have been for nothing. Although there were many thoughts and thoughts, everything actually happened in the blink of an eye. In the eyes of the spectators, they only saw Roland floating in midair with a silver crown appearing on his forehead. His tremendous divine power transformed into a physical divine domain. The silver divine domain and the grayish-purple divine domain clashed, corroding and pressing against each other. The two descended gods immediately clashed, using the most barbaric method to compare their power levels. Perhaps it was because Roland, who was a vessel, was far stronger than Adrian, or perhaps it was because Womian's, who had two divine domains, was stronger than the god of poison, or perhaps it was because Felix, who had just ascended to godhood, was far from being a true god. The result of their clash was obvious. Silver had an overwhelming victory. Battle of Gods. This battle that would decide who would become the ruler of the Northlands had finally reached its final stage. The gods were beginning to directly interfere in the battle. Although I seemed quite impressive right now, I actually had a splitting headache, my mind was hazy, and I was about to fall asleep. But I knew that if I fell asleep now, I probably wouldn't be able to ever wake up again. Shadow. With a low roar, an illusory shadow came to life. It attached itself to my body and began greedily devouring divine power to grow. This was the power that I had obtained in the snowy mountain. Frigid Maw, which had been unable to hatch for a long time, finally transformed into a shadow of ice. Right now, it was a newborn that was extremely lacking in nutrients. Divine power, which was of the same origin, was the best nourishment for it. Why was it of the same origin? Womian's divine power was of the same origin as mine. This Frigid Maw was my companion species, which was also of the same origin as me. The end result was that Frigid Maw and Womian's were also of the same origin. Frigid Maw would grow together with its host. It would absorb its host's emotions and gradually evolve. And this newborn Frigid Maw called Shadow had already absorbed more than 300 years of my negative emotions. Perhaps the craziness and warping in a desperate situation had created its frightening power. Even though it had just hatched, it was already able to easily toy with and even kill Fomal. If it absorbed enough divine power to make up for its innate deficiency caused by being unable to hatch for so long, it would be unimaginable how strong it would become. It was definitely worth looking forward to. Under the nourishment of the silver divine power, the black shadow began to change color. The silver shadow began to become more and more tangible. Under the accumulation of coincidences and coincidences, a brand new type of divine power was being born. From afar, Shadow was nothing more than Wumian's wings of light after his god's descent. Those feathers of light that filled the sky were exceptionally beautiful. The silver wings of light continued to spread out, and a silver-white cape covered the face of the god. Wumian's silver mask descended into the mortal realm. Countless one-eyed emblems opened in midair. His gaze was everywhere as he examined the entire world. Actually, this special equipment was the form that Shadow had chosen to transform into. Right now, as the other half of his body, he was helping me to carry a portion of the divine power. This also allowed me to finally relax a bit and spare some energy to control this inconceivably powerful divine power. Target locked on, Felix. Divine art, great judgment. A silver light had already enveloped this world. The god of law with wings of light spread out his arms, summoning a nameless thick codex in front of him. Judgment. The silver-white gavel caused countless waves as the masked and robed judge began to examine the sinner before him. In the god of law's divine domain, no crime could escape his eyes. At this moment, under the gaze of the eye of justice, countless crimes appeared before him. The codex kept flipping to the page labeled with the crimes and punishments. In front of the original codex and the god of law, no existence could be exempted, even if he was also a god. You have sinned. The silver divine domain began to expand. Since these beastmen were here as well, how could I possibly let them go? Since they were still waiting at the scene of their crimes to share in the spoils of their crimes, I was going to judge them all together. Asterisk kiss. Asterisk unfortunately, the spider god screams tore apart the expanded divine domain. Its struggles took up most of my energy and caused me to lose the possibility of dealing with this trouble once and for all. Silence. The divine domain suddenly contracted, and silver chains bound the gigantic spider god. Biting off more than I could chew, I focused all of my divine power and attention on the opponent before me. Divine law, the first of the 13 sins. Those who willfully take the lives of others for their own selfish desires shall receive the god of law's harsh judgment. Even after death, they shall be punished by mountains of swords and seas of fire. Divine law, from the very start, didn't have any restrictions on who it could be used on. It was a law created by the god of law, but it was also his teachings, as well as the reason for the god of law's existence. Yes, from the very start, divine law didn't have any restrictions on who I could judge. I had intended to judge the gods from the very start. Judge the gods? Have you gone mad? This was ALS astonishment at the time. No, it's this world that's gone mad. This was my reply. Let me, this lunatic, let you arrogant idiots, let you bastards who treat the hard lives of ordinary people as entertainment, let you know what the dignity of mortals is. If I don't drag you bastards to the bench of judgment, how could this damned war ever end? Divine law, carry out judgment. Silver chains materialized and dragged the spider god down to the mortal plane. A dark purple divine soul began to merge into his body. This judgment was directly targeted at a true god's true body. The silver cross transformed into a sharp blade, and the light of law transformed into a boiling sea of magma. In between illusion and reality, the spider god was currently being tortured. And this was only the beginning. Divine law, the 7th of the 13 sins. Those who willfully take bribes for their own selfish desires, break the law, and neglect their duties shall be stripped of all their positions and demoted to a commoner. Felix, thou wantonly descended to the mortal plane, causing slaughter and war. Countless lives have died because of you, and the river Styx is filled with vengeful spirits. Even though he was being tortured by mountains of swords and seas of fire, the enraged spider god was still doing his best to struggle, attempting to break free from his restraints. He had a premonition that his end was right in front of him. Thou art not fit to be a god. I hereby declare that the poison god Felix shall be demoted to a commoner. The complete suppression of the divine domain allowed the great judgment spell to take effect. From that moment onwards, Felix lost his divine domain. No matter how much power he had left, he was nothing more than a gigantic savage beast, not a venerated true god. I knew that once the divine domain disappeared, Felix would return to his status as a god. I was still far from having the power to truly judge the gods, so this kind of deprivation wouldn't last long. But it was enough. A bright white thunderbolt first struck Felix's head, causing him to scream out in pain. As my most trusted partner, how could Adam possibly miss out on such a good opportunity? His large wound didn't instantly heal like before. Without his divine domain, divine power, and indestructibility, Felix was nothing more than a slightly larger and more difficult beast to deal with. Hurry! Don't waste the opportunity that Lord Woomian's created. White Wolf, victory! Silver Cross, charge! Don't let those Southerners steal the glory of slaying a god. That's ours. Black Eye Legion, grit your teeth and stop. Is there anyone else in the Rhodes Royal Guards? Damn it, even if I'm the only one left, I'm still going. I can't let anyone look down on me. The cannons that had overheated to the point of being useless were ignited once more. The heavily injured knight began his final charge, and among the exhausted army, the 4 elemental swordcasters were the most eye-catching as they replenished their mana through the Borealis. The other warriors had already used up all their mana in the long and drawn-out battle, but the swordcasters, who were born for the battlefield in this new generation, had already replenished their mana through the Borealis. They were currently tossing out fireballs and lightning arrows, using the most basic elemental power to create irreparable wounds on a true god, bringing him to the brink of death. It's still not enough. There's no time. But for what I could sense, this still wasn't enough. Felix still hadn't received any fatal injuries, but I was already at my limits. Chaotic memories that I had already lost filled my head, and the increasingly heavy dizziness made me want to just sleep, but is there really no other way? It was so difficult for me to reach this step. Am I going to fail just like this? I can't accept this. Our souls were beginning to resonate and merge again. If I didn't cancel the God's Descent soon, I probably wouldn't be able to do so anymore. I wanted to grit my teeth and persist, but my increasingly hazy consciousness made persisting meaningless. Just sleep here. Why must you be so persistent? No. Ben, cancel the God's Descent. Your soul is currently melting. You absolutely can't. Who am I? Woomians? Roland? Black Hand? Rolo? Tempting words were stealing away my consciousness, and Felix's struggling divine power was making everything worse. My chaotic memories caused my consciousness to become chaotic, and I was already at my limits, but Aurora Knight Squadron, return. Let these invaders know the wrath of the people of the mist. Long live the will of the mist. We returned. The familiar battle cry startled me. Weren't those my Royal Knight Squadron coming over from the horizon? They had finally caught up. The Mist Kingdom's Royal Knight Squadron, 54 Aurora Knight Squadron, are all here to pay our respects to His Highness Roland. Your Highness, we've returned. Ah, my Knight Squadron, I knew that you wouldn't disappoint me. After all, no matter if it was 378 years ago or 252 years ago, you still wouldn't disappoint me. No matter if it was 132 years ago or 1 year ago, you still wouldn't disappoint me. The Donglan Principality, the Aurora Knight Squadron, 174th Aurora Knight Squadron, are all here to pay our respects to His Highness Roland. We pay our respects to His Highness Roland. Your Highness, leave the rest to us. This group of youngsters from a new generation followed their teacher and circled around in front of me. Then they suddenly pressed down on their iron helmets and charged towards that gigantic divine power beast while laughing maniacally. Brat, well done. The first king of the mist, Frigid Maw Lion King who rarely praised me, suddenly transformed into a gigantic lion statue and pounced towards Felix. But he was destined to fail. Ah Dang is here. Ah Dang will beat up whoever dares to bully Ah Pa. If it wasn't for that familiar voice, nobody would have associated that gigantic Storm Titan giant with an abomination. The Storm Titan giant that suddenly descended smashed Felix into the ground, while the gigantic bone dragon that suddenly dived down screeched and shot out its breath of death. This was a rare sight. On the ground, the undead knight and the holy knight were charging together, while the dragon knight was actually on the same side as the bone dragon. The corpse eater king was actually raising the human's sacred sword. Unknowingly, I seemed to have gotten one step closer to the ideal land in my dreams. I had already lost control of my hazy consciousness, but I firmly held onto the shackles. That wild beast had already fallen into the cage. Felix, you want to escape? Stop dreaming. Let's first pay some interest for the bloodshed on this land. After that, I will ask Lorcy for the principal. Chapter 196. An ancient legend reappeared at this moment. Even an undying true god would one day fall. However, the chains that represented heaven's punishment pulled Felix down from his divine throne. Without the status of a true god, and without the divine power that allowed him to regenerate limitlessly, he finally began to panic. Ever since he had ascended to the divine throne, he had never considered the possibility of failure. To him, war was nothing more than a game, and mortals were nothing more than pawns in this game. But now, this game was going to take his life. Panic finally appeared in his 8 eyes. He finally felt fear and despair, which was something he had always brought to mortals. Finally, he wanted to escape, but it was too late. The 7 deadly sins had arrived. Damn gods, did we, the people of the mist, ever offend you? Are you done yet? Is it so hard to live a peaceful life? The furious Bastion tore off Felix's leg in one bite, causing blackish-purple poisonous blood to splatter everywhere. The gigantic 3-headed hellhound had already become even larger than the spider god. 2 of its heads were constantly creating new windows, while the last head roared in anger and spat out an aura of death. Without a doubt, he was venting his anger, but there was nothing wrong with his questioning. In fact, some warriors were also questioning the ugly spider god. Why is it us again? Why can't we just peacefully live in this land? This species of the Northlands had already suffered far too much. The people living here also wanted to ask why the flames of war had once again been ignited in their homeland. Was simply wanting to live peacefully such an extravagant hope? But Felix didn't answer, nor was he able to answer. A dang hate spiders. The Titan giant with a low, muffled voice transformed into a gigantic 8-tailed octopus. Its soft yet tough limbs wrapped around the ferocious behemoth, and it used a technique that normal people wouldn't be able to learn to lock down Felix's ability to resist. Its thickest limb transformed into a heavy, cylindrical hammer that constantly whipped Felix's head. For dang, things like truth and justice had never been important. Peace, which made people dull, was also meaningless. But there was one thing that he absolutely couldn't tolerate. If someone bullied his family, he would give his all and viciously beat them up. Lock down the limb joints. Launch the half-tank ammunition. This time, when the cannons and smoke covered the sky, although Felix's outstanding defense allowed him to ignore the cannons, Envy's aurora borealis spun like a dragon towards Felix and stabbed its high-speed, spinning ram into Felix's forehead. That was the cursed horn of the demigod-level sea monster, Narwhal. That attack contained some divine power, and it was not something that Felix, who had been stripped of his divine domain, could ignore. Chi! Felix's shrill cries sounded like an extremely vicious curse magic, but unfortunately, the 2 larger undead beasts locked him down and prevented him from moving. He could only obediently become a live target. But this was only the beginning. The new son of the 7 deadly sins was showing off his abilities in front of his elder brother. Mine, all mine. I'm jealous of your divine eyes. I'm going to take it. The dark light around Envy's body flickered. Felix had lost 4 of his eyes, while 4 dark green compound eyes appeared on the front of the Borealis. Felix, who had lost half of his eyes, was in an even worse state than being blind. A chaotic scene appeared in his mind, and under the pressure of the surrounding beasts, the constant shaking of his vision caused him to lose his balance. Little brothers, your elder brother is here. That familiar deep voice caused the 2 beasts to simultaneously pause in surprise. Only the guy who made others feel uncomfortable would use such a form of address. But after those frivolous words came a fierce thunderclap. 10 million undead army. Countless undead armies suddenly appeared, and they furiously surged out like a volcano erupting. The low-level undead furiously climbed onto the spider's body, putting on a magical version of ants swallowing an elephant. But the game wasn't over yet. Ah, my fist is beautiful, even if it's just. My justice is the will of my kingdom. The man in tights made a gliding motion. The countless thin threads were actually a connection that originated from their souls. Those connections gave the man who was so powerful that no one could look at him directly. That exaggerated flying kick directly pierced through the gigantic beast's abdomen. Countless amounts of divine blood sprayed out from the wound, and the ground that was stained by the blood distorted the plants. The wailing spider prince was heavily injured. Omar's attack indeed had the effect of finishing the battle, but what greeted him was the complaints of his comrades. What elder brother? You're the youngest. Dang is the elder brother. The 4 deadly sins had all arrived, and the powerful undead army had arrived as reinforcements, allowing the defenders to heave a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, the true protectors of this land, the Ace Knight Squadron, which was said to be undefeatable even with more than 100 enemies, was now moving from an ancient myth into reality. In the sky, streaks of beautiful silver-white light were the even more astonishingly powerful warriors. The experienced Knight Squadron wasn't impatient at all. They were like a pack of wolves surrounding a tiger or leopard, searching for the weakness of their prey. And at this moment, Felix, who was on the verge of collapse, had already revealed his weakness. Everyone prepare to charge. Death shoot tactic. The Aurora Knight Squadron, which had never numbered more than 100, actually had close to 300 riders this time. The famous number 1 Knight Squadron of the Northlands had walked out from the ashes of the Mist Kingdom, and the classic tactics of the past had once again appeared on the stage of history. The Aurora Knight Squadron, which was entirely made up of gold, transformed into beautiful silver meteors that soared through the sky. Their spears and ice arrows were currently freezing Felix's vitals and joints, but wherever their subordinate frigid moss stepped, a new path of ice would be formed. And when the crystalline path of the sky rainbow was finally constructed, the slumbering white dragon had already transformed into a deadly sharp sword. Everyone charge! At the top of the slanted path of extreme ice, the veteran Knight Squadron was leading the charge. The newbie Air Knight Squadron loosened their reins, allowing the legendary rank Polar Demon to lead them in a charge. Vanguard, Ice Blade. Invader, go to hell. While it was sliding, the accumulated power of ice formed a sharp blade of ice. And when it didn't matter how big or how fast it kept increasing in speed, it was already a deadly aurora blade that reached the ice path. Countless gigantic aurora blades began to cut at the spider god's body. And when even more ice blades descended, the Aurora Knight Squadron within the ice blades used their own bodies as blades, transforming into streaks of light that tore at Felix's body once again. Rear formation, reorganize, second wave. And the Knight Squadron that tossed out its own ice blade flew up once more, flying to the beginning of the ice path to begin a new round of shaping ice weapons. Until all the Aurora Knight Frigid Moss Squadron's mana was used up, these ice blades would never end. This was the death shoot tactic that was specially used to bombard and deal with gigantic targets. The highest number of ice blades in history was 36 Knight Squadrons that created the death shoot tactic to kill an immemorial white dragon. But this time, there were more than 10 times that number of Aurora Knight Squadrons. Those countless ice blades were the pinnacle of physical attacks, and they even contained the cold of death magic. Apart from Ah Dang, who didn't feel any pain, even Bastion and Omar had to urgently avoid them. And this time, it was the turn of the Lion King Gui Ming, who was also Frigid Moss Squadron commander, to transform into a gigantic beast and seal off Felix. But soon, he discovered that this was completely unnecessary, as he was immune to ice damage from his own species. Felix was currently limp and injured to the point where he couldn't move at all. Oh, the blind and crippled spider was of no threat at all. It screamed and howled in pain as the poison god, who brought death, was pierced through repeatedly. Finally, with ice blades all over its body, it collapsed. But at this moment, Dang transformed into a gigantic mouth devourer and bit off the spider's head, dealing a fatal blow to Felix. After the gigantic spider god lost its head and collapsed, I heard the notification of congratulations to my host. The god-slaying quest has been completed. You will be rewarded with a god equipment. I finally relaxed my tense will and immediately canceled my god's descent. Finally, with the satisfaction of finally winning, I watched Wumian's soul return to my divine kingdom. I gave up and fell into a deep sleep. Congratulations, you did it. When I woke up from my slumber, the first sentence I heard made me feel very stunned. The next moment, all of my fatigue disappeared. That was because I recognized who this young man before me was. Ale. The person who was leaning against the windowsill and looking outside was none other than the death god Ale. However, this time, he wasn't wearing his signature black robe. His long white robe made him seem more like a scholar. What did I do? The aftereffects of God's descent were still present in my body. My chaotic memories were still tangled up in the back of my mind. I didn't even know what had happened. Ale paused in surprise at my question, but then he smiled. Felix died. Although a god participated, he was probably the first god to die at the hands of a mortal in the past 2,000 years. Bits and pieces of memories flooded my mind. The scene of the spider god being surrounded and killed in the end appeared in my mind. A true god who had just ascended to the top of the world had died instantly. The entire world would probably be shocked by this, and Lorcy would definitely be furious. Right, what did Rose do? How did she react? Rose died. Ale fell silent yet again after casually tossing out such a heavy bomb. Died? How did she die? Unlike Felix, Rose had descended in her true body. Although she wouldn't be able to return to her divine kingdom for a short period of time, a true god in her true form would definitely be terrifyingly strong. Unlike Felix, who had just ascended to the divine kingdom, Rose was a veteran true god and was even stronger, who in the mortal world could kill her. Abyss Prince Cavendish did it. Not even her corpse was left behind. Cavendish? Yes, the fence-sitter finally angered the leaders of both sides. The original leader wanted to kill her, but the New Order faction didn't have anyone willing to protect her, so she died. Humph. Now, some of the people who are still wavering are scared to death. Ale said casually, but it only took a little to realize that the news of two true gods dying in the Dark Elf God faction would definitely cause a huge commotion. Right? What happened to the northern battlefield? What happened to those beastmen in the end? Ask her. She's probably waiting anxiously. At this moment, the door to my room suddenly opened, and Eliza walked in. She had an expression of relief when she saw that I had woken up. You're finally awake. You've already slept for 6 days. If you didn't wake up, I wouldn't know what to do. 6 days? Perhaps it was because my chaotic memories had blurred my mind, but I felt like less than a day had passed. Countless noisy groups of people entered my room, and they all had one thing in common. Your Highness, Her Highness Renee, isn't here, so we need you to decide how to organize our military. The generals of the other countries all want you to attend meetings. You needed to deal with post-war affairs, new territories, and spoils of war. This time, our dukedom is going to make a huge profit, and we won't be able to control the situation without you. The undead army is currently stationed outside the city. Although they haven't caused any panic due to their performance in that battle, we need an effective communication channel. The Rhodes Kingdom has mentioned the possibility of accepting the Church of Law. The highest-ranked Bishop Shuity requests that you meet with him to discuss the specifics. That man from the undead army actually organized a bodybuilding competition. He and Lord Shuity are competing in beauty in the finals, and they're even going to rip their clothes off. That scene is so beautiful that I don't even dare to say it. Sir, only you can stop them. Before they completely destroy the city, please act quickly. In the blink of an eye, countless messy matters were thrown at me before I could even react. When I turned around to ask for help, I discovered that Ale had already disappeared without a trace. Right after that, I was instantly drowned by the army of people before me. The hospital bed was already filled with all sorts of urgent matters and official documents that needed to be dealt with. Right, Eliza? You can go look for her. She's my authorized representative. Where would I find such a good person? But before I could look at Eliza, the former demon marquis, who had long since expected that he would be forced to act as my representative, also instantly disappeared without a trace. Hey, don't be so heartless. I just woke up, and you want me to do all this? I wanted to slip away, but the attendants around me had already placed their knives on my necks. They were threatening to kill me if I didn't do anything. I could only sigh helplessly as I took the documents and began the most tiring task. It would be great if the little girl was here. I don't know where Renee went, and Cavendish should have returned by now. Why hasn't Renee returned yet? As expected, once a girl grows up, she no longer cares about her father. At the same time, Renee also exclaimed in surprise, "Where is this? Why am I here? Am I not in the Northlands anymore? In the heart of human society, in the Bardi Empire's largest red light district, in the most expensive restaurant, Night of the Elves?" Renee suddenly woke up with a start as she was surrounded by women. She then discovered that her surroundings were quite crowded. Why are there so many women here? Achoo! What a strong perfume smell! In the small room, there were more than a dozen gorgeously dressed women looking at her, and those women were either looking at her affectionately, or they couldn't wait to stick their bodies to her, and there were even some who were already groping under her clothes. "My lord, why aren't you singing anymore? I'm still waiting for your little song." The golden-haired young woman blushed as she spoke. Her blush and her eyes were filled with love. She looked at Rain as if she was a young girl in love for the first time. Her large, snow-white breasts were even more dazzling. Rain, who had no experience with this, immediately blushed when she was suddenly hugged, even though she was of the same gender. Then, something even more shocking came from the mouths of the surrounding women. "My lord, are you thinking about it again? Let our sisters rest for a while longer." Many of them were exhausted last night. Although they were saying that they were refusing, their flushed faces and how easily they undid their clothes revealed their true thoughts. Renee couldn't take it anymore when she saw this. Wait, don't take off your clothes. Hey, why are all of you taking off your clothes? I'm a woman as well. Milord just loves to play this kind of game. I already knew that Milord is a woman, but Milord is much stronger than those useless men. Our sisters can't leave you. Everyone is waiting for you to redeem their freedom. This time, looking at these hungry gazes and their snow-white breasts, Renee knew that a disaster was about to befall her. 1 week later, a report was placed in front of Roland and me. What? Renee spent half a month in the most luxurious red light district of the Bardi Empire, winning the favor of countless beauties and the title of Emperor of 10,000 Flowers. She even agreed to countless requests to redeem her freedom, but in the end, she was penniless and was detained by the red light district. She wants us to pay money to redeem her. After hesitating for a moment, I finally replied the messenger. You're probably mistaken. We don't have a man named Renee here. Yep, definitely not. What? She's a woman? Then there's no such thing. Everyone in the Mist royal family is normal, and there are definitely no perverts. Yep, definitely not, I never lie. Chapter 197. Oh, the wild lilies in full bloom. How charming they are. How beautiful their songs are. Their dances are as beautiful as butterflies. She's the queen of the red light district, the dream lover of all men and women. During my meeting with Renee, I purposely found a few bards to sing the hymns that had been sung recently to her. All right, but surprisingly, Renee didn't react at all. She had a blank expression, and her eyes were bloodshot. When she saw me, her legs softened, and she almost fell to the ground. Asterisk on my arm. She fell asleep in seconds. She actually started snoring. All of the punishment methods that I had prepared had been wasted. It seemed that Rain was having quite a hard time as well. For a gold rank law knight, physical fatigue was nothing much, but the mental pressure was probably suffocating her. After all, to a girl, her reputation, which was the most important thing to her, had been ruined. Even if she wanted to marry, she wouldn't be able to. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy and guilt. After all, even though this was all Cavendish's fault, the declaration I made back in the Ottoman Empire was the true beginning of all this trouble. Otherwise, I could have thought of a way to explain myself instead of the current legendary Lily Knight Princess Dragonslayer War Chronicles. She and her 18 Flowers novel, storytelling, and drama editions are all selling like hotcakes. And you can even get a 20% discount for bundles. If you buy 3 sets at once, you'll even get a free painting poster. I'm sorry, it's all because we old fellows went too far. Thinking about this, I felt even more guilty. Big brother Roland, Nini doesn't blame you. Hearing these gentle words from my arms, I couldn't help but feel moved, so stop licking my feet. Nini knows that you like me, but pretending to be a dog isn't a good way to express your love. Also, don't take off your clothes. You're so perverted. You actually want to wear my clothes? Fine, if it's Lon, that's fine. Stop sniffing, it's so embarrassing, and stop licking. Is panties that good? Just directly lick me. My face immediately turned green. What kind of nonsense is this? That, Your Highness, please don't be angry. Her Highness Renee has been cursed by the succubus Sweet Dreams. These days, she has been pulled into strange dreams, so she hasn't slept since she came back. It's not easy for her to stay up until now. Sweet Dream Curse? What was that? A purgatory's succubus' natural talent is to arouse a person's deepest desire. Then, from that opening, the succubus will be led to indulge in their desires and gradually fall into depravity. For example, a greedy person will dream of bathing on a mountain of gold, and a lustful person will dream of being surrounded by countless beauties. As for little Renee, the curse was probably left behind by Cavendish. It made her more inclined towards desire and depravity towards chaos, so that it would be easier for me to descend into chaos next time. All right, as a demon lord, Eliza naturally understood the knowledge of the chaos abyss very well. Thus, upon hearing this, I smiled in delight. In other words, Renee's heart is full of those messy thoughts? Was this her innermost wish? My black history of cross-dressing? A pervert who treats me as a fetish? He. It seems that I really need to correct her. No, just a personality correction punch isn't enough. Let's just brainwash her and recreate her personality. At the very least, that dark history of hers definitely can't be left behind. With a face full of smiles, I carried Renee and walked towards my room. It seemed that I would have to prepare a brainwashing forbidden spell. I would be quite busy today. Her Highness Renee is in trouble. His Highness Roland must be furious to death. Even His Highness Roland has darkened. His smile is so scary. As for me, I suddenly thought of something as I turned around and smiled at the attendants. You didn't hear anything today, did you? Or do you want me to help you forget something? The two of them had panicked expressions as they kept shaking their heads. I didn't hear anything. I definitely didn't hear anything. I nodded in satisfaction as I looked at the two lads who kept shaking their heads. Obedient children were good children, while disobedient, naughty children needed to be disciplined. Looking at Renee in my arms, I chuckled. Let's start from there. Right, it's been a long time since I played mud wrestling and bungee jumping. The little black room seems pretty good too. However, the sound of the wind whistling past and the familiar heavy footsteps made me close my eyes helplessly. Boom! A huge hole appeared in the wall that had just been repaired. Beside it, there were already 3 human shape holes that had just been patched up. Boom! All right, I just knew it. These fellows never knew how to use the door. Haha, come and catch me then. Don't run. Ah dang is the older brother, the bastard who made us run naked during the chaos. The scene of these brothers fooling around was really nostalgic. However, the little dwarf who was the older brother was holding the 1,000-ton stone pillar and swung it around, creating a huge hole in the wall. On the other hand, the big muscle man who was the younger brother could casually open a hole in the wall. From a certain standpoint, the mental age of the two of them was quite young. I could understand their fooling around, but if I were to be dragged into it, no matter if it's Omar's brute strength or Adang's huge stone pillar, both of them would probably die on the spot. Dying from playing hide and seek with a brat? That's too scary. Thus, I did my best to hide my existence and intended to leave quietly. However, I felt that something was wrong. Wait, where did that stone pillar come from? Why does it look so familiar? I feel like I've just seen it before. Then, I thought of it, but it was already too late. Darned dang. That's the main pillar of this house. Well, the lower and lower ceilings, the crashing of the house, have given me the answer. The Beastman King Amont Blood Axe is dead. From a certain standpoint, this was completely within my expectations. Before I lost consciousness, the tables had turned, and the Highland Beastmen were forced into a desperate situation. The final reinforcements, the Highland Beastmen, were blocked off by the undead army and the underground. When they discovered that even a true god was about to die, and that the human reinforcements were becoming stronger and stronger, the Highland Beastmen, who had just suffered a painful defeat a year ago, rationally chose to retreat. When the Carradine tribe leader retreated with all the Highland Beastmen tribes, the surviving Highland Beastmen discovered to their astonishment that they had lost all their allies, while the enemy's power level had increased immeasurably without them realizing it. We absolutely can't let Felix die. Otherwise, we'll all die here. The invincible true god's descended body was forced into a desperate situation. The Beastmen's remaining troops were forced to enter the battlefield. They knew that the blood feud they had with the Northland's humans, Shiloah's undead, Greyblood elves, and the underground allied army would be impossible for them to win. In order to avoid unnecessary losses, the Beastmen's main forces had retreated to the Divine Domain. When they truly began to rescue Felix, they would first have to face the ambushes of the underground allied army and the undead army. Shiloah's reinforcements and the underground allied army were all powerful and well-prepared. That was why the Beastmen's reinforcements were naturally intercepted. In this desperate situation, when Felix died, some of the Beastmen finally laid down their weapons and chose to surrender. However, Amont Blood Axe and the remaining Beastmen tribe leaders unhesitatingly chose to fight to the death instead of retreating. They knew that as the instigator of this invasion and as the #1 war criminal, they would definitely be punished after they lost the battle. In that case, rather than being humiliated and hanged on the gallows, it would be better to gloriously die in battle. And so, Amont's severed head became the spoils of war of a certain young soldier, and the fanatical Beastmen army finally met with complete annihilation. They either died or surrendered. Following the fall of Amont Blood Axe, the largest Beastmen invasion in the past 200 years had officially failed. Even if the humans didn't deal with the Highland Beastmen, they would still need at least 100 or 200 years to recover. And I knew that they probably wouldn't have any hope for the duration of this holy war. Without a guardian god, they would only weaken even further. And in reality, this wasn't the only loss in this battle, nor was it the biggest loss. The biggest loss was the Dark Elves, who originally had nothing to do with this. In the past 1,000 years, Rose had led the Dark Elves to make a living in the underground world. The original superior elf empire's values had long since been twisted. The Dark Elves' social customs, culture, religion, and social structure were all branded with Rose's personal mark. It could be said that the majority of the Dark Elves were Rose's personal property. Just like how the humans on the surface couldn't imagine life without the sun, the Dark Elves couldn't imagine life without Rose. But now Lorcy was dead. In the span of a single night, Lorcy's priests and matriarchs, who stood at the top of Dark Elf society, were all heavily injured. They would either directly die or fall into insanity. The best result would be losing all of their power. And in the cruel world of Dark Elves, being weak was the greatest sin. And if the powerless were still the high and mighty matriarchs, then what awaited them was an even more pitiful ending. In a single night, when the news of a true god's death was confirmed by the priests who had lost their power, 90% of the underground world under Rose's control fell into chaos. The entire Dark Elf society fell into chaos. And what was more dangerous wasn't just the social chaos. All along, Rose had been the supreme existence of most of the Dark Elves. Her will was the law and pursuit of this race. Every family fought against each other in order to obtain the Spider Queen's favor. The entire dark elf race lived for Rose's benefit, and now she had fallen. Then, to the dark elves who viewed Rose as their sky, this was no different from the sky collapsing. The fatal loss of faith and collapse was the true trouble. Some of those whose faith had collapsed turned into fearless thugs. Some chose to commit suicide, but the majority still instinctively searched for new replacements. In a single night, countless new gods, fake gods, and evil gods appeared. Many existences who could ascend to godhood locked their sights on the gap left by Rose. Cough! Actually, the god of law Womians acted very quickly. Those silver-masked judges were swiftly and effectively restoring order in the various underground world elves. Of course, Sulphur Mountain City's military might was also a deterrent. At the very least, it was obvious that the red hunting hounds who remained in the underground world had sent out their troops. If this situation continued, before the birth of a new true god of the Dark Elves, the entire race would probably fall apart and then be eaten up by various factions. Of course, the one who would benefit the most would be the current underground autarch and faction. At the very least, the Church of Law, which was restoring order in the various underground world and giving justice to thugs, was becoming more and more popular among the Dark Elf commoners. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the new order of the Dark Elf Society would shock the entire world. It wasn't that the other true gods didn't want to interfere, but from a certain standpoint, this was also a war between the Dark Elf gods and the Law gods. And now, as the victor, the Law gods was beginning to reap the spoils of war. Naturally, the other true gods had no chance of interfering. In a short half a month, not only did Womians replenish the god power he lost during the god's descent, but due to the extreme expansion of his believers in territory, he even began to advance once again. This time, if he was able to completely take over Rose's territory, he might even become a mid-level god like Rose. In fact, Womians even began to consider the possibility of establishing a follower god to become the Dark Elf Guardian God. If it was a peaceful era, going from a quasi-god to a low god and then to a mid-level god would be an exceptionally arduous journey. For a true god to advance, it would require thousands of years of accumulation, and countless generations of guardian gods would be required. However, this was during the Holy War, and this was also an opportunity that the Holy War brought to the true gods. In every Holy War, countless new gods would rise and fall. It wouldn't matter much if one had a good laugh now. Only the one who had the last laugh would be the true victor. I had handed over all the mortal affairs of the Church of Law to Shiwedi and Lilith, so I didn't intend on managing them at all. However, since Roland had successfully completed a god's descent and hadn't died yet, not only was his status as a god envoy confirmed, the Law job class members were also looking at me with fanatical gazes, which made me recall the events of Womian's era. But right now, I didn't have the time to worry about such matters. An even greater problem was right in front of me. Cough! Today, the main point of our discussion is still the rescue work of the Northland's elves. Right now, they're constantly facing natural disasters, with hailstorms and blizzards coming one after another. I heard that there was even a blizzard and hurricane just a few days ago. They also lack winter rations and clothing, and some of the insane dark elf have turned into thugs. If we continue to ignore them, I'm afraid that the Northland's elves will become history. However, the moment I finished speaking, there was only silence. It was obvious that the generals of the various countries lacked interest. After all, every country had suffered great losses in this battle, and the indecisive elves had spent most of their time on the enemy's side. Many elves already had a blood feud with them, so how could they possibly be willing to help? Seeing this situation, I laughed. Fine, if you don't care, I'll care. Hearing this, all the generals paused in surprise. This time, the main target of the elves' enmity was the Sluir Kingdom, which was the people of the mist. Although this person in front of me had a good reputation on the surface, his reputation in private was comparable to that of an apocalyptic demon king. No matter how I looked at him, he didn't seem like a selfless good person who would repay evil with good. Yep, I've been longing for Liosu City for a long time. That library has been passed down for tens of thousands of years, and the countless magic and art treasures passed down from the Elven Empire can't be destroyed by this disaster. All right, as soon as I said this, everyone instantly understood. How was he going to help them? He was going to dig up a plot of land. Of course, he could have done all this in secret, but why did he say it out loud? Just what was this living legend thinking? Just what did he intend to do? Why did he have to bring up this topic here? For a moment, the conference room fell silent. Only the sound of my index finger tapping on the table could be heard. The Holy War has already begun, and there will no longer be a peaceful place in the entire continent. This time, we were able to deal with it because of luck. Next time, we might not have the descent of a true god or so many reinforcements. In order to deal with the upcoming Holy War, I intend to establish an alliance in the Northlands, the Mist Alliance. First of all, it will abide by the principle of non-war. Don't start a war of aggression. And it will believe in law and the Northland's guardian god as its national religion. That's why everyone doesn't need to worry that the Mist Alliance will be a threat to the various countries. Under the terms of the Mist Alliance, each country will have the right to be independent and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. This is the most basic rule. Secondly, it will abide by Wumian's teachings. As long as one hasn't committed a crime, all species and individuals are innocent and non-evil. That's why the Mist Alliance won't limit the number of species and countries that can join. According to what I know, at least the remnants of Shilaw, some underground residents who yearn for the light, the Cheryl Autonomous Region's half-beastmen, the Barbarian Alliance, the Dahlon Principality, and the Slower Kingdom have all submitted their applications to join the Mist Alliance. Hearing this, everyone's faces were filled with astonishment. This was already far beyond the realm of betrayal. It would be understandable for the gods' churches to send down a divine decree to summon a holy war the very next day. But if this Mist Alliance was truly established, everyone couldn't help but shiver. At this time, with so many powerful factions allied together, it was likely that the entire Northlands would be under Wumian's control. At that time, Wumians would become the true guardian god of the Northlands. The Mist Alliance would doubtlessly be a super heavy political and military bomb. Everyone would have to constantly think about the effects of its establishment. From a certain standpoint, this war was also a melting pot. All the species that hated each other got to know each other and established a basic level of trust. This gigantic alliance would then become a reality. This isn't appropriate, is it? This holy church, haha. Hearing this, I chuckled and then spoke in a serious tone. Martianess AI Show of Roads. Do you still not recognize her? This is already the middle of the Holy War. Us Northland barbarians can't rely on anyone else. If we don't band together for warmth, how will we survive this difficult winter? Martianess AI Show was about to say something, but I shook my head. I know what you want to say. Relax. Soon, the flames of war will be ignited everywhere. The Holy Church won't even be able to deal with its own matters. Besides, this is also Wumian's will. As a true god of order, do you really think that he'll be treated as a heretic? We're just pitiful people who need to band together to survive the winter. The Mist Alliance will never actively invade us, but do we Northlanders not even have the right to survive? After hesitating for a moment, AI Show finally gave up on speaking. But for me, this was only the beginning. The only legal successor of the Tassel Kingdom, Princess Ansuna, has also requested to join the Mist Alliance. So, after this rescue mission is completed, perhaps all the Northland's elves will become members of the Mist Alliance as well. All the generals present were shocked. This was already quite direct. She intended to swallow the entire elven species in one go. Her appetite was actually so huge. That's why I hope that all the countries will join this alliance and participate in the rescue mission together. We will open up all sorts of technology within the Mist Alliance. This includes the magic swordsmen and floating airships that appeared in this war. This time, the royal families of all the elven countries suffered a destructive blow, and their main armies were completely destroyed. Perhaps there won't be any more Northland's elven countries in the future. It'll be great for the elves to live together in the various countries. Discussing benefits between countries was the most practical. The Mist Kingdom's new technology and the elves' secret inheritances were astonishingly tempting. There wouldn't be a second chance if they missed this opportunity. Without a doubt, throwing out the bait was the most effective form of invitation. After saying all this, I turned around and left. I had said all that I needed to say. If I still didn't take care of the rescue mission, Ansuno would start haunting my room again in the middle of the night. As my most trusted aide, Eliza had been waiting outside my door for quite some time. Aren't you afraid that you'll force them too much and cause a life-and-death struggle? Relax. Nobody's an idiot. Once the Holy War begins, the mega empires won't even have the time to worry about us. Small countries want to survive, and now is the best time to suck up to a powerful ally. This time, the ally we've revealed is both white and tender. Once they understand the situation, they'll want nothing more than a pounce on us. Sexual harassment. Eliza adjusted her eyeglasses as she changed the topic in a rather abnormal direction. But suddenly, an attendant passed by me, and a slip of paper appeared in my hand. 2 hours from now, I hope to have a small gathering. AI Shiosoder. Haha. See, the first person to suck up to a powerful ally is here.